Sold to the highest bidder, The Oligarch's Property is a dark romance audiobook by Amy Seymour, narrated by Eve Thompson and Declan Cooper.
Chapter 1. The coffee at the Roaster's Nook always tasted the same: burnt, bitter, predictable, just like everything else in my life. I sat in the same corner booth I'd occupied every Tuesday morning for the past 3 years, nursing my overpriced latte and watching the world move forward without me. The barista, Tyler, according to his name tag, had stopped asking for my order 2 years ago. He just saw me walk in and started making it. Medium latte, extra foam, 1 pump of vanilla. That should have felt comforting, like I belonged somewhere, like I was a regular, like I mattered. Instead, it felt like a prison sentence, like I'd become so predictable, so invisible, that I was just another fixture in this coffee shop's daily routine. 31 years old. Single, living in a 500 square foot apartment that smelled perpetually of the Indian restaurant downstairs, a mix of curry and cardamom that had seeped into my furniture, my clothes, my hair. Working as a dietitian at Creekside Post-Acute, where my most exciting daily decision was whether Mrs. Chandler would accept pureed carrots or pureed sweet potatoes with her lunch. Where my most meaningful human interaction was explaining to family members why their 90-year-old mother couldn't have a cheeseburger and fries, despite that being all she wants. This wasn't the life I'd imagined at 21, fresh out of college with a degree in nutrition science and dreams of opening my own wellness center. That girl had been full of fire, ambition, certainty that the world was waiting for her to claim it. She'd pictured herself helping people transform their lives, maybe writing a book, definitely making a difference. 10 years later, I'd learned the world wasn't waiting for anyone. It just kept spinning, and you either found your place on it or got left behind, forgotten, irrelevant. I was definitely being left behind. My phone buzzed against the scarred wooden table, pulling me from my spiral of self-pity. Instagram notification. Another engagement announcement. This time, it was Catherine from my graduate program, younger than me by 2 years, married to a software engineer who worked at Google, already pregnant with her second child. Her ring was enormous, a princess cut that probably required its own insurance policy. Her smile in the photo was radiant, genuine, the kind of happiness that seemed to come so easily to everyone else. Her caption read, "He said yes to forever. Baby number 2 on the way. Life is perfect. Hashtag blessed. Hashtag so in love." Hashtag baby number 2. I closed the app before I could read the comments section, which I knew would be full of congratulations and heart emojis and other people celebrating a happiness I couldn't seem to find. I opened Tinder instead because apparently I was a masochist. Swipe left, swipe left, swipe left. The faces blurred together. Men holding fish they'd caught, men in group photos where I couldn't tell which one was actually them, men whose bios read, "just looking for fun," or "nothing serious," or the particularly insulting, "let's see where this goes," which really meant, "I want to sleep with you, but I'm too cowardly to say it outright." Men who were probably perfectly nice, but who made me feel absolutely nothing when I looked at their photos. Men who might want a relationship but seemed content with mediocrity, with lives as beige and unremarkable as mine. I switched to Hinge, which was marginally better. At least the profiles had more information, gave me something to work with beyond a single photo and a 3-word bio. But the pattern remained the same, had remained the same for years now. The men I found attractive, ambitious, driven, successful, the kind of men who looked like they knew what they wanted and went after it, wanted me for a night, maybe a weekend if I was lucky. They'd wine me and dine me, take me to upscale restaurants where I'd order carefully to avoid seeming too hungry or too picky, where I'd laugh at their jokes and make myself smaller and more agreeable. And then they'd take me to bed, and it would be good, sometimes even great, and I'd let myself believe for a few hours that this might be different, that this might be the start of something real. Then they'd disappear, ghost me. Or worse, send a text a few days later saying they weren't looking for anything serious right now, or didn't feel the connection they were hoping for. Good enough to bed, never good enough to wed. That's what my best friend Shirley called it when I'd cry on her shoulder after yet another disappointment. The men who actually wanted relationships were nice, boring, safe. They had steady jobs and reasonable expectations, and they'd probably make adequate husbands and fathers. They'd come home at 6 every night and help with dinner and remember to take out the trash. They'd be faithful and reliable and utterly, completely uninspiring. When I looked at them, I felt nothing. No spark, no electricity, no sense that life with them would be anything other than more of the same beige existence I was already suffocating in. I wanted passion. I wanted intensity. I wanted someone who looked at me like I was the answer to every question he'd ever asked, like I was something precious and valuable and worth fighting for. Someone who would claim me, protect me, make me feel like I belonged to something bigger than my small, insignificant life. Someone who made me feel alive instead of just existing. I wanted what everyone else seemed to have found so easily. My biological clock wasn't just ticking anymore. It was screaming, pounding in my ears every time I saw a pregnant woman or a baby stroller or those families of four walking through the grocery store looking tired but content. Every month that passed felt like another door slamming shut, another opportunity lost. I'd read all the articles about fertility declining after 35, about pregnancy risks increasing, about how the window for having a healthy baby got smaller and smaller with each passing year. 4 years. I had 4 years before everything got exponentially harder, more expensive, more uncertain. 4 years before I'd be considered a geriatric pregnancy if I did manage to conceive. 4 years before I'd officially be too old to have the 3 or 4 kids I'd always imagined having. The thought made my chest tight with panic, made my coffee suddenly taste even more bitter than usual. Meredith? Tyler appeared beside my table with the coffee pot, his young face friendly and open. Refill? I nodded, even though the last thing I needed was more caffeine adding to my anxiety. He poured, and I noticed the way he smiled at me. Friendly, familiar, nothing more. Tyler was probably 23, 24 at most, still young enough to believe the world held infinite possibilities, still years away from the creeping dread that came with watching your 30s slip away while you remained fundamentally alone. I used to believe that too. Used to think I had all the time in the world. I left the coffee shop 40 minutes later and made the 20-minute drive to Creekside Post-Acute through familiar streets, past the same strip malls and fast food restaurants I'd been driving past for years. The building itself was a squat utilitarian structure, painted in shades of beige and cream that were probably meant to be soothing but just looked depressing, institutional. Inside, it smelled of disinfectant and overcooked vegetables, and something else, something indefinable that all nursing homes seem to share. The scent of time running out, of lives winding down, of the inevitable end we were all marching toward. My office was a closet-sized room with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a poster showing the food pyramid that the USDA had abandoned years ago, but that no one had bothered to replace. I had a window that looked out onto the parking lot. Sometimes I'd stare at it during particularly difficult days and imagine just getting in my car and driving away, not stopping until I reached somewhere completely different, somewhere I could be someone else. But I never did, because where would I go? What would I do? This was my life. This was all I had. I spent my morning reviewing meal plans, adjusting dietary restrictions, and trying to convince the kitchen staff that allergies and intolerances weren't suggestions but medical necessities. Mrs. Chandler had thrown her pureed sweet potatoes at her nurse yesterday. Mr. Rodriguez's family was upset that we weren't accommodating his request for spicy foods, despite his documented GERD and hiatal hernia. Ms. Johnson needed her sodium restricted, but she kept sneaking salt packets from the dining room. These were my battles. These were the problems I solved. This was the impact I made on the world. Lunch was a protein bar eaten at my desk while I scrolled through Facebook, which was apparently another masochistic tendency I couldn't break. More engagement announcements. A former roommate's baby shower invitation, complete with a registry that included a $400 stroller and a $200 diaper bag. A college friend's 10th wedding anniversary photos, her life a perfect tableau of suburban bliss. White picket fence, golden retriever, two tow-headed children, and a husband who looked at her like she hung the moon. I closed the laptop harder than necessary, the screen wobbling before settling back into place. The afternoon stretched ahead of me in a series of 15-minute consultations with residents who mostly didn't want to be there and family members who felt guilty for putting them there. I smiled and nodded and made recommendations that would probably be ignored, and tried not to think about the fact that this was my life, day after day after day, until I retired or died or finally gave up and married someone I didn't love, just to have something different, just to not be alone anymore. That evening, back in my apartment with its curry-scented air and its secondhand furniture and its walls I'd never bothered to paint because what was the point? I opened a bottle of wine and settled onto my couch with my phone. The couch was a hand-me-down from my mother, covered in a floral pattern that had been dated even when she'd bought it 15 years ago. The wine was cheap, $7 from the grocery store, but it did the job. Tinder first. I'd gotten 3 matches since morning, none promising. One was clearly a bot. One was a shirtless mirror selfie with no bio. One was a man named Mark who looked nice enough, but whose profile suggested his primary interests were video games and comic books. Not that there was anything wrong with that, but I knew already it wasn't what I was looking for. Hinge next. 2 messages waiting. The first was from an accountant whose profile suggested he enjoyed hiking and craft beer. His message was polite, friendly, asking about my weekend plans. I could already picture the trajectory of this relationship if I pursued it. A few dates, some okay conversation, mediocre sex, a gradual realization that we had nothing in common, a mutual fading away. Boring, but harmless. The second message made me pause. The profile showed a man in his early 30s with dark hair and sharp features, high cheekbones, strong jaw, intense eyes that seemed to look directly through the camera and into something deeper. He was attractive in a way that made my stomach flutter, not conventionally handsome like a Hollywood actor, but magnetic, compelling, dangerous in some way I couldn't quite articulate. The kind of face you couldn't look away from even if you wanted to. His name was Slava Voronin. His location was listed as traveling. His bio was brief. Ukrainian in the US for Daytona 500, looking to make the trip memorable. His message was simple, direct. You have kind eyes. Tell me what you see when you look at my profile. It was different. Not the usual, hey, beautiful, or wanna grab drinks. Not crude or trying too hard. Just interesting, genuine, somehow, despite coming from a complete stranger. I should have been suspicious. Should have wondered why a Ukrainian tourist was on Hinge in Florida. Should have questioned what memorable meant to him. Should have recognized all the red flags that, in retrospect, were probably there from the beginning. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. Curiosity, interest, hope. I typed a response. I see someone far from home looking for connection. What do you see when you look at mine? His reply came within minutes. I see someone tired of being invisible, someone waiting for life to start, someone who deserves more than what she has. I stared at my phone, my heart beating faster than it should. How had he seen that? How had a stranger on a dating app looked at my carefully curated photos and bland bio and seen the essential truth of my existence? We messaged back and forth for hours that night. He told me about his life in Buka, a small city outside Kyiv that I had to Google to find, about his work as an engineer for a construction company, designing structural systems for buildings that would outlast both of us, about his family, his mother who still cooked traditional Ukrainian meals every Sunday, his father who'd fought in Afghanistan in the 1980s and never quite recovered, his younger sister Karen who was studying to be a doctor. He asked about my life with a genuine interest that felt almost foreign. He wanted to know about my work, not just what I did, but how I felt about it. He asked about my frustrations, my goals, my dreams. When I admitted I felt stuck, trapped in a life I hadn't chosen and didn't want, he didn't try to fix it or dismiss it. He just understood. Sometimes we build cages for ourselves, he wrote. We think we're making safe choices, responsible choices. And then one day we wake up and realize we're prisoners of our own caution. Yes, I typed back, feeling tears prick my eyes. Exactly that. We moved from messaging to phone calls the next day. His voice was deep, rich, his accent turning certain words into something almost lyrical. He worked odd hours because of the time difference, 8 hours ahead in Ukraine, so he'd call me during his lunch break, which was late evening for me. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing, the kind of conversations that felt like discovering someone who spoke your secret language. Then we moved to video calls, and I could see his face while we talked, watch the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, notice how he'd run his hand through his hair when he was thinking hard about something. "Come to Daytona," he said one night, his face pixelated slightly from the connection, but still compelling, still magnetic. "The race is this weekend. We can watch together, get to know each other properly, face to face." "That's crazy," I replied, even as something inside me whispered that maybe crazy was exactly what I needed. "We've never even met in person." "You could be a serial killer." He laughed, the sound warming something cold inside me. "I could be, but I'm not. And life is too short to wait for perfect circumstances, Meredith. Sometimes you have to take a chance. Sometimes you have to jump and trust that you'll land somewhere better than where you're standing." I should have said no. Should have been sensible, cautious, careful. Should have recognized this for what it probably was: a vacation fling, a tourist looking for a good time with a convenient local girl. But I was 31 and alone and so tired of being sensible. I booked the hotel room before I could talk myself out of it. The Daytona International Speedway was overwhelming in a way I hadn't anticipated. The massive grandstands stretched into the sky, packed with thousands upon thousands of people, all wearing their favorite driver's colors, all buzzing with collective excitement. The noise was deafening, engines roaring, announcers blaring through speakers, crowds cheering. The smell was a mix of racing fuel and hot dogs and beer, and thousands of people crushed together in the Florida heat. Slava met me at the entrance, and the connection I'd felt through screens translated immediately, powerfully to real life. He was taller than I'd expected, probably 6'2", broader through the shoulders than he'd seemed on my phone screen. When he saw me, his face broke into a smile that made something in my chest squeeze tight. "You're here," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt simultaneously foreign and familiar. I could smell his cologne, something woody and expensive. Feel the solid warmth of his body against mine. "You actually came." "I'm here," I agreed, still half convinced I'd lost my mind. "I can't believe I'm here." "Come on," he said, taking my hand with a casual confidence that sent electricity up my arm. "I'll show you everything." The race itself was a blur of color and sound and speed. I barely understood what was happening on the track, despite Slava's patient explanations about drafting and pit stops and what made certain drivers better than others. But it didn't matter. What mattered was the way he leaned close to talk directly into my ear so I could hear him over the crowd noise. The way his hand stayed on the small of my back, possessive and protective. The way he looked at me between explaining things about the race, his eyes dark and intense and full of promise. Between race segments, we talked, really talked. Not the carefully curated conversation of first dates where you present your best self and hide your flaws, but the raw, honest exchange of two people who'd already done the preliminary getting to know you phase and were ready for something deeper, something real. He told me about growing up in Ukraine, about the complicated history of his country, the Soviet era, the Orange Revolution, the ongoing tensions with Russia, about his grandmother who'd survived the Holodomor, the forced famine that killed millions of Ukrainians in the 1930s, and how that history shaped his family's worldview, about learning to value freedom above everything else because his grandparents had lived without it. I told him about my parents' divorce when I was 12, about how my father had left for another woman, and how my mother had never really recovered, had retreated into bitterness and disappointment that had colored my entire adolescence. About my younger sister, who'd married at 23 and made it look easy, who now had 2 kids and a husband who adored her and seemed to have figured out the secret to happiness that continued to elude me. About my best friend Shirley, who was also single but seemed content with it in a way I couldn't manage. About my fear that I'd somehow missed my window for the life I wanted, that I'd waited too long and been too picky and now it was too late. "You haven't missed anything," Slava said, his hand finding mine in the stands, his fingers intertwining with mine. "You've been waiting. There's a difference. You've been waiting for someone worth your time, for something real. That's not failure, Meredith. That's wisdom. Or cowardice," I said. "Or impossible standards. Or knowing your worth," he countered. "I don't want a woman who settles. I don't want someone who's with me because I'm convenient or because she's running out of options. I want someone who chooses me because I'm exactly what she's been looking for." The intensity in his voice, the certainty, made my breath catch. "And is that what I am? What you've been looking for?" "From the moment I saw your profile," he said, turning to face me fully, the race continuing behind us forgotten. I saw your photo and I thought, that's her. That's the woman I've been waiting for. I know that sounds insane. I know we just met. But I don't want to pretend I don't feel what I feel. I'm not interested in games or casual dating or wasting time. I'm 33 years old. I want something real, a partner, a wife, a family, children, a life built with someone, not just lived alongside them. And when I look at you, Meredith, I see all of that. I see the future I want. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was too much, too soon, too intense, that normal people didn't talk like this on a first date, that I should slow down, be careful, protect myself. But the part of me that had been slowly dying in the beige monotony of my life suddenly roared back to life. I want that too, I whispered, and it felt like the truest thing I'd said in years. I want exactly that. He reached across the space between us and took both my hands in his grip warm and strong and sure. Then let's not waste any more time pretending we don't know what we want. We stayed for the rest of the race, but I couldn't have told you who won. All I could focus on was the man beside me, the way his presence seemed to take up all the space in my awareness, the way his hand never left mine, the way he looked at me like I was something precious he'd been searching for his entire life. That night, we had dinner at a seafood restaurant overlooking the ocean. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, and Slava sat across from me in the golden hour light, looking like every dream I'd ever had made flesh. We ordered too much food, grilled shrimp and lobster tails and crab cakes, and fed each other bites, laughing when butter dripped down our chins, the intimacy of it feeling natural rather than forced. Tell me about your family, I said, spearing a piece of shrimp. Your sister Karen. You said she's studying medicine? Yes, her final year. She wants to be a pediatrician. She's brilliant, stubborn, drives my parents insane with worry because she works too hard, never dates, never goes out. He smiled, affection clear in his expression. She says she doesn't have time for relationships while she's in school, but I think she's scared. Our parents' marriage hasn't always been easy. My father struggles with PTSD from Afghanistan. My mother enables him. Karen has watched that dynamic her whole life, and I think it's made her cautious. Is that why you're looking for something so definite? I asked. Because of what you saw growing up? Partially, he admitted. I saw what happens when two people stay together out of obligation or fear rather than genuine partnership. I don't want that. I want something strong, something where both people choose each other every day, not because they have to, but because they want to. What about your father? I asked carefully. Is he okay now? Slava's expression darkened slightly. He has good days and bad days. The war damaged him in ways that never fully healed. He drinks too much. He has nightmares. But he's still my father, still the man who taught me how to build things, how to solve problems, how to be strong. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. I think that's part of why I became an engineer, building things that last, creating structures that can withstand pressure and time. It feels like the opposite of what war does. War destroys. I want to create. I felt something shift inside me, some deep recognition of this man across from me. That's beautiful, I said softly. What about you? He asked. Tell me about your family, your sister who makes marriage look easy. I laughed, but it came out bitter. Emily, she's 28, married to her college boyfriend, two kids under 5, lives in a house with an actual white picket fence in suburban Portland. She's living the dream I thought I'd have by now. Every family gathering, she's there with her perfect little family, and I show up alone, and I can see the pity in everyone's eyes. The questions about when I'm going to settle down, the helpful suggestions about lowering my standards or trying harder, or maybe considering therapy to figure out why I can't seem to make it work. Maybe you're not the problem, Slava said quietly. Maybe you just haven't found your match yet. Or maybe I'm too damaged, I said, voicing the fear I rarely admitted even to myself. Maybe watching my parents' marriage implode broke something in me, made me unable to trust or commit or whatever it is normal people do so easily. Or maybe, he said, reaching across the table to take my hand again, you've just been protecting yourself, waiting for someone who's worth the risk, and maybe. His thumb stroked across my knuckles, sending shivers up my arm. Maybe you finally found him. The certainty in his voice should have scared me, should have sent up red flags about moving too fast. about love bombing, about all the warning signs that self-help articles and true crime podcasts had taught me to watch for. But it didn't. It just felt right. We spent the next 3 days together, barely apart except to sleep in our separate hotel rooms, though by the third night, that boundary had dissolved too. Being with Slava physically was like everything else with him: intense, consuming, overwhelming in the best possible way. He touched me like he was claiming me, like I was something precious he'd been searching for and finally found. He made love to me like it meant something, like it was sealing some unspoken promise between us. Afterward, lying tangled together in sheets that smelled of sex and his cologne, he stroked my hair and murmured in Russian, words I didn't understand, but that sounded like poetry. "What does that mean?" I asked sleepily. "It means you are mine," he said. In Russian, we say "Ty moja," you are mine, and I am yours. "Ya tvoi." "Ty moja," I repeated carefully, the words foreign on my tongue. "Ya tvoi." He pulled me closer, kissing my forehead, my temple, my lips. Yes, exactly that. When he had to return to Ukraine, we spent the last few hours before his flight curled together on my hotel bed, neither of us wanting to let go. "This doesn't end here," he said firmly. "We do long distance, we make it work, and as soon as we can, we close the distance permanently." "How?" I asked practically. "You have your life there. I have my life here, even if we wanted to." "Then we figure it out," he interrupted. "You could move to Ukraine. I could move to America. We could meet somewhere in the middle. I don't care about the logistics, Meredith. I care about you, about us. We'll find a way." We made it official before he left, changed our relationship statuses on Facebook, posted photos together on Instagram. I deleted Tinder and Hinge from my phone with a sense of relief and finality. This was it. This was what I'd been waiting for. Long distance was hard in all the expected ways: time zones making communication complicated, physical distance making everything harder, the constant ache of missing someone who was too far away to touch. But it was also exhilarating. Every morning, I woke up to messages from Slava, sent from 8 hours ahead in Busha, where he was already at work, already thinking of me. Every evening, we video called for hours, making plans for the future, talking through everything from the mundane details of our days to the big questions about what we wanted our life together to look like. He wanted 3 children, maybe 4. I wanted at least 3. He wanted to eventually start his own engineering firm. I wanted to open a wellness center. He liked the idea of living somewhere with 4 distinct seasons. I'd always dreamed of having a garden. The puzzle pieces of our separate lives seemed to fit together seamlessly, creating a picture of a future that felt not just possible but inevitable. Shirley was skeptical. "Mur, you barely know this guy. You spent 3 days together. That's not enough time to decide to upend your entire life." "It's enough time to know," I insisted. "When you know, you know." "Isn't that what everyone always says?" "Everyone says a lot of things that turn out to be bullshit," she replied. "I'm not saying he's not a good guy. I'm just saying maybe slow down. Visit a few more times. Give it more than a couple months before you start planning the wedding." But I didn't want to slow down. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I felt alive, purposeful, like I was moving towards something instead of just treading water. Slava made me feel seen in a way no one else ever had. He valued my opinions, respected my intelligence, desired my body, wanted my future. He didn't want to change me or fix me or mold me into someone more convenient. He just wanted me, exactly as I was. 5 months into our relationship, I used all my accumulated vacation time and booked a flight to Kyiv. The journey was long: a connection through London, then another short flight to Ukraine's capital. Slava met me at the airport holding flowers, his face breaking into that smile that still made my stomach flip. He swept me into his arms, kissing me in front of everyone, and I didn't care who was watching. "Welcome to Ukraine," he murmured against my lips. "Welcome home." Bucha was smaller than I'd expected, more provincial. The buildings were a mix of Soviet-era apartment blocks, stark utilitarian concrete structures, and newer construction trying to modernize the city. The streets were tree-lined, creating tunnels of green in the summer heat. It was charming in its own way, different from anything I'd known in America but not unwelcoming. Slava's apartment was on the fourth floor of one of the Soviet-era buildings, accessed by a narrow stairwell that smelled faintly of cabbage and cleaning supplies. The apartment itself was modest but comfortable. 2 bedrooms, a small living area, a kitchen that had been updated sometime in the last decade. It was tidy, masculine, with few decorative touches, but well maintained. I know it's not much, he said, suddenly seeming uncertain. Compared to American standards, it's perfect, I interrupted, meaning it. It's yours. That makes it perfect. He introduced me to his family that first evening. His mother, Nadia, was a petite woman in her late 50s with kind eyes and hands that never stopped moving, cooking, cleaning, gesturing as she spoke rapidly in Ukrainian. She spoke no English, but she communicated through gestures and elaborate meals, pressing food on me with the universal language of maternal care. His father, Dmitri, was quieter, more guarded. I could see the toll the war had taken on him in the way he held himself, in the shadows behind his eyes. But he was warm enough, shaking my hand formally and nodding his approval when Slava translated that I worked in healthcare. His sister Karen was closest to my age, brilliant and intense with her brother's same sharp features. Her English was excellent, learned from American television shows and movies. She peppered me with questions about America, about Florida, about celebrities and fashion, and whether I'd ever been to New York or Los Angeles. Ignore her, Slava said fondly. She thinks America is one giant Hollywood movie. It's not? Karen asked with mock innocence. You mean you don't see famous people at the grocery store? I laughed, and she grinned, and I felt some of the tension in my shoulders ease. This could work. This could actually work. The next few weeks passed in a blur of domesticity and discovery. I learned to navigate Bucharest streets, to identify which buildings had the best markets, to understand the rhythm of life in a post-Soviet city. Slava took me to Kiev several times, showing me the golden domes of Orthodox churches, the sobering memorials to the Holodomor, the bustling markets where babushkas sold everything from fresh produce to handmade crafts. We talked about the future constantly. He showed me plans for the engineering firm he wanted to start. I described the wellness center I'd always dreamed of opening. We debated whether it made more sense for me to move to Ukraine or for him to move to America, weighing the pros and cons of each option. We talked about children, how many, what we'd name them, how we'd raise them to appreciate both cultures. I want them to speak both languages, Slava said one evening as we walked along the river in Kiev, Ukrainian and English. I want them to understand both sides of their heritage. What about Russian? I asked. I'd learned that most Ukrainians spoke both Ukrainian and Russian, a complicated linguistic legacy of Soviet rule. His expression darkened. Russian is useful, but it's not who we are. Ukrainian is our language, our identity. That's what I want our children to speak. I didn't fully understand the politics then, didn't grasp the depth of the historical tensions between Ukraine and Russia. It seemed like ancient history, something that shouldn't matter anymore in the modern world. I would learn better soon enough. One evening, after a particularly perfect day exploring the city, Slava took me to a park overlooking a small lake. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the water, turning the sky shades of orange and gold. He'd been quieter than usual all day, and I'd started to worry that maybe the reality of me being there was different from the fantasy we'd built over video calls. Then he got down on one knee. The ring was modest, a simple solitaire that he immediately apologized for. I know it's not much. I'm saving everything for the business, and I wanted to put that money toward our future rather than an expensive ring. But I promise someday I'll buy you something better. Stop, I interrupted, tears already streaming down my face. It's perfect. You're perfect. This is perfect. Meredith Harris, he said, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes shining in the dying light. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children? Will you build a life with me, whatever that looks like, wherever it takes us? Yes, I said, the word coming out as a sob. Yes, yes, yes. He slid the ring onto my finger and pulled me into his arms, and I felt like everything in my life had been leading to this moment, like all the disappointments and dead ends and years of waiting had been preparing me for exactly this. We were married 2 months later in a small ceremony in Bucha. Planning a wedding in a foreign country with a language I barely spoke was chaotic, but Slava's mother took charge, organizing everything with the same efficient care she applied to her cooking. My parents came, though I could see the doubt and concern in their eyes. My mother kept asking if I was sure, if I'd really thought this through, if I understood what I was giving up. My father was more blunt. You barely know this man. You're throwing away your career, your life in America, for someone you've known less than a year. But my younger brother Peter was supportive, if bemused. And Shirley, despite her earlier concerns, stood as my maid of honor and told me I looked beautiful and that if this was what I wanted, she'd support me no matter what. Just promise me you'll come back if it doesn't work out, she whispered as she helped me with my dress. Promise me you won't disappear into some foreign country and lose yourself completely. I promise, I said, even though I couldn't imagine needing that escape route. This was forever. This was my future. Slava's family embraced me with a warmth that felt both foreign and desperately needed. Extended family members I hadn't met before came to the wedding, aunts and uncles and cousins who spoke no English but hugged me fiercely and pressed gifts into my hands. The ceremony itself was a beautiful mix of Ukrainian and American traditions. We exchanged vows in both English and Russian, promising forever in two languages. I wore a dress I bought in Kiev for a fraction of what American wedding dresses cost, simple white lace that made me feel like a bride without bankrupting us. Slava wore a suit that had belonged to his grandfather, altered to fit his broader frame. When he looked at me during the ceremony, when he said his vows with tears in his eyes, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. The reception was held at a local restaurant filled with traditional Ukrainian food and vodka toasts and dancing that lasted until the early morning hours. Slava's father gave a speech in Ukrainian that Karen translated for me about how his son had found a treasure and better protect it well. My mother cried through her own speech about letting go and trusting love. Shirley made everyone laugh with stories about my disastrous dating history before Slava. That night, in Slava's apartment, now our apartment, he carried me over the threshold despite my protests that we were 4 flights up and I wasn't exactly light. He laid me on the bed we would now share permanently and made love to me with a tenderness and intensity that felt like a claiming, like he was branding himself onto my soul. Tai Moya, he whispered against my skin. Mine. Always mine. Ya te voya, I whispered back. Yours. Always yours. Our first full day as husband and wife was peaceful, quiet. We stayed in bed late, ordered food from a local restaurant, talked about all the plans we'd made come into fruition. I would quit my job at Creekside. The thought filled me with more relief than sadness. I'd start the immigration paperwork to live in Ukraine permanently. Eventually, maybe in a few years, we'd move to America so any children we had could have U.S. citizenship. But for now, this would be home. Are you scared? Slava asked, stroking my hair as we lay tangled together. Terrified, I admitted, but also excited, also ready. I feel like my real life is finally starting. Mine too, he said. Everything before you was just waiting. You're the actual story, Meredith. You're what I've been waiting for. 24 hours after our wedding, I woke to my phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. The sound pulled me from deep sleep, that disorienting moment where you can't quite remember where you are or what day it is. For a confused second, I thought I was back in my apartment in Oregon, that the wedding had been a dream. Then I felt Slava's warm body beside me and remembered. Ukraine. Married. Home. The phone kept buzzing. I grabbed it, squinting at the screen in the dim morning light. 17 missed calls from my mother, 23 text messages from various family members and friends, notifications from news apps lighting up my screen. My stomach dropped before I even read the first message from my mother. Meredith, call me right now. Then the second from her, get out of Ukraine. Then the third, Russia is invading. And the fourth, please call me, I'm begging you. Then Shirley's message, Meredith, check the news now. Get to the embassy. Get out. Lastly, my brother, Peter's message, call mom. She's losing her mind. What's happening over there? I sat up, my hands shaking, and opened the news app. The headline made my blood run cold. Russian forces mobilizing at Ukraine's border, U.S. President announces. Putin orders full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Slava was already awake beside me, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at his own phone. His face was pale, his jaw tight in a way I hadn't seen before. What's happening? I asked, even though I could see the answer on both our screens. This can't be real. This doesn't happen anymore. Not in Europe. Not in the 21st century. He didn't answer immediately, just turned his phone toward me, showing me Ukrainian news sites with similar headlines, all dated from the early morning hours. While we'd been sleeping peacefully in our newlywed bed, the world had been catching fire. It's happening, he said finally, his voice hollow. The next hours were a chaos. I still can't fully piece together in my memory. Phone calls with my parents who were frantic, my mother crying so hard she could barely speak, my father's voice hard and angry in a way I'd never heard before. They were already looking at flights, trying to get me out. Come home, my mother sobbed. Please, baby, come home right now. This isn't safe. You need to leave. Now. Today. I just got married, I said, hearing the hysteria creeping into my own voice. I can't just abandon my husband. I can't. Then, bring him with you, she practically screamed. I don't care, just get out of there before. Her voice broke completely. Shirley called next, more direct. Mur, you need to leave. Now. This isn't a joke. This isn't some third world country conflict. This is Russia. This is Putin. They have nuclear weapons. They don't play games. Get to the American embassy. Get on a plane. Do it today. I can't just leave, Slava, I said, looking at my husband who was in the other room talking rapidly in Ukrainian to what sounded like his parents. We just got married. We're supposed to. You're supposed to stay alive, Shirley interrupted. Everything else can be figured out later, but you have to be alive to figure it out. When Slava came back into the room, I grabbed his hands, squeezed them so hard my knuckles went white. We need to go to America, right now, just until this calms down, just until it's safe. We can stay with my parents, figure out your visa later, but we need to leave. He shook his head, and I felt my heart sink even before he spoke. Meredith, nothing is going to happen. This is fear-mongering. This is Western media doing what Western media does, making everything into a crisis, into the end of the world. But the US president said, is probably overreacting, Slava interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind, or playing politics, or I don't know what. But look outside. He gestured to the window. Look at Buka. Does it look like a city preparing for war? I did look, and he was right. Outside our window, life continued normally. People walking dogs, an old woman with a shopping cart making her way down the sidewalk, a group of teenagers on bicycles, cars driving by at normal speeds, no panic, no evacuation, no military presence, no sense of imminent danger. Everyone here thinks the same thing, Slava continued, sitting beside me and taking my hands. My parents, my friends, Karen, everyone. The news here is saying this is overblown. Yes, there's tension with Russia. There's always tension with Russia. It's been that way since the Soviet Union fell. But Ukraine is not some tiny border territory. We're a country of 40 million people. Bucha is nowhere near Russia. We're close to Kiev, which is in the center of the country. And even if something did happen, which it won't, we have family there. Russia is it's complicated, but many Ukrainians have Russian relatives. My grandmother on my father's side was Russian. Half the country speaks Russian as a first language. We're not enemies in the way your media makes it sound. They wouldn't just invade. It would be insane. It would be economic suicide for Russia. It would turn the whole world against them. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly, because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. The alternative meant war, meant death, meant my brand new husband in danger, his family in danger, me in danger. What about Crimea? I asked, grasping at the one concrete example I knew. They already took Crimea in 2014. That was different, Slava said patiently. That was strategic. Crimea has always been disputed territory, and it has the naval base Russia wanted. That was a targeted annexation, not a full-scale invasion. This would be completely different. This would be war on a scale that makes no sense. There's no strategic value. Ukraine isn't threatening Russia. We're not part of NATO. We're not a danger to anyone. This will blow over. You'll see. Even Ukraine's president appeared on television that afternoon, and Karen translated for me as we all gathered in Slava's parents' apartment to watch. He looked calm, measured, almost annoyed by the panic. We call for level heads and rational thinking, he said. The Western media is engaging in panic and fear-mongering. Ukraine is safe. Our military is strong. Diplomatic channels remain open. This situation will be resolved through dialogue and negotiation, as it always has been. There is no need for panic. There is no need for evacuation. Please continue your lives normally. Do not let fear control you. After the broadcast, Slava's father poured vodka for everyone, even me, though I rarely drank hard liquor. He raised his glass and said something in Ukrainian that Karen translated. He says, "To peace, to sanity, to the fools in Washington who think they know Ukraine better than Ukrainians." We all drank, and the vodka burned going down, but it also calmed something in my chest. My parents left that afternoon along with Shirley and Peter. They had to, their flights were already booked, and the American embassy was urging all U.S. citizens to leave Ukraine immediately. My mother sobbed at the airport, clinging to me like she'd never see me again. "Please come with us," she begged. "Please, Meredith, I'm your mother. I'm begging you." "Don't stay here." "I'll be fine," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "You heard the president. Even Ukraine's own president says this is overblown. Everyone here thinks it's fine. They live here. They know better than American news networks." My father looked at me with something between disappointment and resignation. "You're making a mistake, but you're an adult. I can't force you." "I'm staying with my husband," I said firmly. "I made vows, in sickness and health. I'm not abandoning him the second things get uncertain." Shirley hugged me so hard I could barely breathe. "If anything happens, anything at all, you call me. You get to the embassy. You get out. Promise me." "I promise," I said, and I meant it. If things got bad, I would leave. But they weren't going to get bad. Everyone said so. Slava said so. His family said so. Ukraine's president said so. Who was I to know better? Peter just shook his head. "You braver than me, sis, or crazier, I'm not sure which." I watched them go through security, watched until I couldn't see them anymore, and tried to ignore the cold dread settling in my stomach. That night, Slava held me close in bed. "You did the right thing," he murmured. "Staying. Being loyal. That's what marriage is. We face things together, not separately." "I'm scared," I admitted. "I know. But there's nothing to be scared of. Tomorrow you'll see. Tomorrow everything will be normal. The news will move on to some other crisis. And we'll start our real life together." I fell asleep in his arms, wanting desperately to believe him. I woke 4 days later to the sound of explosions. The noise was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. A deep, percussive boom that shook the windows and rattled the dishes in the kitchen cabinets and set off car alarms throughout the entire neighborhood. Then another boom, and another, each one a physical force that I felt in my chest, in my bones. Slava was already out of bed, throwing on clothes with frantic speed, his face no longer calm, no longer certain. "Get dressed. Now, hurry." "What's happening?" I asked, even though some primal part of me already knew. "Belarus gave them passage," he said, his voice tight and angry and scared. "The Russians came through Belarus. No one expected. We thought if anything happened, it would be from the east, from the Russian border. But they came through Belarus. They're already here. They're already in Ukraine." The next hours dissolved into a nightmare blur that I still can't fully piece together coherently. Slava's father arrived at our apartment speaking rapidly in Ukrainian, gesturing urgently toward the window where we could see smoke rising in the distance. Slava's mother was crying, clutching Karen, who looked pale and shocked. They brought bags, packed hastily with supplies, food, water, documents, warm clothes despite it being spring. "We're going to the basement," Slava told me, his hands shaking slightly as he helped me gather our things. "The building has a shelter from Soviet times. It's reinforced. We'll be safe there." "We need to leave," I said, my voice rising with panic. "We need to get to Poland or Romania or somewhere. We need to get out of Ukraine entirely." "It's too late," Slava's father said in halting English. "Roads blocked, military everywhere, civilians who try to drive." He made a gesture I didn't understand, but that chilled me to my core. We grabbed what we could, our passports, some clothes, bottles of water, whatever food was in the apartment. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip my bag. I kept thinking this couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. Wars didn't happen like this anymore, didn't just explode into existence overnight in the modern world. We joined the stream of residents flooding down the narrow stairwell to the basement. The shelter was exactly what Slava had described. A Soviet-era bunker, cold and damp, lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs that cast everything in sickly yellow light. It was already crowded with families, children crying, old people praying in Ukrainian and Russian, everyone speaking at once in languages I barely understood. The explosions continued, sometimes close enough that dust fell from the ceiling, sometimes distant enough that they were just muffled thuds. We had no way of knowing what was being hit, how close the danger was, whether Bucha itself was under attack, or if the fighting was still on the outskirts. Slava kept his arm around me the entire time, pulling me close against his side. "It's going to be okay," he whispered, but I could hear the doubt in his voice now. "This is temporary. The Ukrainian military will push them back. NATO will intervene. The West will do something. This can't last." But it did last. Hours became days in that basement. We ventured upstairs only when absolutely necessary, only when the shelling seemed to have stopped temporarily. Each time there was more damage. Windows blown out, craters in the street, buildings with entire walls missing, exposing the intimate details of strangers' lives, a kitchen table still set for dinner, a child's bedroom with posters on the walls, a bathroom with towels still on the racks. Bodies, sometimes. Civilians who'd been caught outside when the shelling started, an old man who'd been walking his dog, a woman who'd been trying to get to the market. The dog was still alive, whimpering next to its owner's body, and one of the teenagers from our building carefully picked it up and brought it into the shelter. On the third day, or maybe the fourth, time had lost all meaning. Someone's phone got enough signal to see the news. The pictures were devastating. Kyiv under siege, Kharkiv being bombarded, Mariupol surrounded, the whole country burning. And the world was watching, but not helping. Not the way we needed. Sanctions were being announced, aid packages promised. But no troops. No intervention. No one willing to actually fight Russia to save Ukraine. We were alone. On what might have been the fifth or sixth day, the Russian soldiers arrived in Bucha. We heard them before we saw them, the sound of heavy vehicles rolling through the streets, boots on pavement, orders being shouted in Russian. Someone in the shelter started crying, a desperate, terrified sound that was quickly shushed by others who were afraid the soldiers would hear. They came through the neighborhood systematically, moving from building to building. When they reached ours, they kicked in the door to the basement and ordered everyone out at gunpoint. We filed up the stairs with our hands raised, terrified, squinting in the daylight that seemed too bright after days in the dim shelter. There were maybe 15 or 20 soldiers, all armed, all armored, all wearing the insignia of the Russian military. They separated us immediately, men to one side, women and children to the other. Slava squeezed my hand one last time before a soldier roughly pulled him away. I tried to follow, tried to stay with my husband, but another soldier pushed me back hard enough that I stumbled. "Stay," he barked in Russian accented English. I watched Slava join the line of men, his father, other men from our building, teenagers who looked barely old enough to be called men. They were being searched, their bags rifled through, documents examined. Then Slava's father said something. I don't know what. It was in Ukrainian, spoken loud enough for me to hear but not to understand. Maybe he was protesting. Maybe he was asking a question. Maybe he was just scared and said the wrong thing. The soldier hit him with the butt of his rifle. Dmitri went down hard, crumpling to the pavement. Nadia screamed, a sound of pure animal anguish. Slava lunged forward, shouting, trying to reach his father. The gunshot was impossibly loud, even after days of explosions and artillery. But this was different. This was close. This was personal. This was my husband. Slava jerked backward as if punched, then folded in on himself and fell. Blood bloomed across his chest, spreading across the shirt I'd watched him put on that morning in the shelter. His eyes were wide, shocked, finding mine across the space between us. Then Nadja screamed again and tried to run to her son, and there were more shots. She fell. Dmitri, trying to crawl toward them despite his injury, was shot again. Karen, just trying to help her mother, took a bullet in the back. I don't remember starting to scream. I don't remember falling to my knees. I don't remember the world going sideways, reality fragmenting into something incomprehensible. I remember the soldier grabbing me by the hair and yanking me back to my feet. I remember the sound of my own voice, raw and broken. I remember my American passport falling out of my bag where I'd been clutching it along with our other documents, falling onto the blood-stained pavement. I remember the soldier picking it up, looking at it, his expression changing. I remember the way he smiled. They separated me from the other prisoners immediately, threw me in the back of a military truck alone, my hands zip-tied in front of me, mouth covered with duct tape. The drive was long, hours of rough roads and darkness, and the smell of diesel fuel mixing with my own terror, and the lingering scent of Slava's blood on my clothes. When they finally pulled me out, we were at what looked like a military installation. Gray buildings, chain link fences topped with barbed wire, men in uniform everywhere, most Russian military, but some wearing different insignia I didn't recognize. They processed me like cargo, photographed me, fingerprinted me, stripped me of my bloody clothes, and hosed me down with freezing water before giving me a gray cotton shift to wear. No underwear, no shoes, just the thin dress that barely covered me. Then they put me in a cell. Concrete walls stained with things I didn't want to identify. A metal bench bolted to the floor. A bucket in the corner for waste. No windows. A single bare bulb that never turned off, so I lost all sense of day and night. I lost track of time. They brought me water occasionally, sometimes food, stale bread, thin soup, things barely worth eating, but I forced myself to consume because some survival instinct insisted I needed to stay alive. No one spoke to me. No one told me what was happening or what they planned to do with me. Sometimes I heard screaming from other parts of the building. Sometimes I heard gunshots. Sometimes I heard nothing but the humming of that bare bulb and my own ragged breathing, and thought maybe I'd gone deaf or insane or both. I thought about Slava constantly, obsessively. The way he'd looked at me during our wedding, the way he'd held me at night, the way he promised me everything would be okay, the way the blood had spread across his chest, the way his eyes had gone empty. I thought about his family, about Nadia who'd welcomed me with such warmth, about Dmitri with his war-damaged soul, about Karen who'd been so full of life and ambition and who died trying to help her mother. I thought about my own family, about my mother who'd begged me to leave, about my father who'd known this was a mistake, about Shirley who'd warned me, about Peter who'd called me brave or crazy. They'd been right. I'd been stupid, naive, blinded by love and hope and the desperate need to believe my fairy tale was real. And now I was here, alone, captive, widowed, destroyed. After what might have been days or weeks, I genuinely couldn't tell anymore. They moved me. The journey involved another military transport, more armed guards, and a sense that I'd passed from one category of prisoner to another, though I didn't understand what that meant. When we arrived in Moscow, I knew from the signs in Cyrillic, from the distinctive architecture I'd seen in photos. They took me to a different kind of facility, cleaner than the military installation, more bureaucratic. Gray carpeted hallways, fluorescent lighting, the smell of coffee and cigarettes instead of blood and diesel. They processed me again. More photographs, more fingerprints, questions in broken English about my background, my work, my family, my husband. I answered mechanically, my voice hollow. What did it matter anymore? "We are determining your value for exchange," one of them told me. He wore an FSB uniform, the modern successor to the Soviet KGB, and spoke better English than the others, with only a slight accent. "America may want you back. If so, we trade you for someone valuable to us. Russian prisoner in American custody, spy, intelligence asset, someone useful. If not," he shrugged, the gesture conveying everything he didn't say. They put me in a cell that was marginally better than the last one. There was an actual cot with a thin mattress and a blanket that smelled of mildew but provided some warmth. 3 meals a day that were barely edible but were at least food. A small window near the ceiling that let me track day and night again. Let me start counting days even though I'd lost count of how many had passed in the other place. I tried to keep my mind occupied, tried to remember recipes from Creekside, tried to recall the layout of my apartment in Oregon, tried to picture my family's faces, anything to stay sane, to not lose myself completely in the nightmare. But mostly I just thought about Slava, about the life we'd barely started, about the children we'd never have, about growing old together, a future that had been stolen in seconds by a bullet and a war that shouldn't have happened. I don't know how long I waited. Days? Weeks? Time moved strangely in that cell. Then, one morning, the same FSB officer returned. His expression told me everything before he spoke, and I felt what was left of my heart sink into my stomach. The American government says they do not know you, he said, his tone almost conversational, as if he was discussing the weather. They have no record of you entering Ukraine. You did not register with the embassy. You married Ukrainian citizen. Therefore, officially, you are not their problem. He smiled, and it was the coldest thing I'd ever seen, which means you are now ours to do with as we please. I found my voice for the first time in days, maybe weeks. I'm an American citizen. You can't. Can't what? He interrupted, leaning against the doorframe casually. We are at war, Mrs. Voronin. Rules are different during war. You were in enemy territory. You married enemy citizen. Your family was killed alongside enemy combatants. And your government, he emphasized the words mockingly, has washed their hands of you. So you are not American anymore. You are just woman. No country, no protection, no rights. He let that sink in for a moment, watching me with something like amusement. But woman has value in other ways, he continued. There are people who will pay good money for women like you. American, educated, still young enough, pretty enough, clean, healthy, virgin maybe? I felt bile rise in my throat. No. Ah, well, doesn't matter so much. Still valuable, still useful to someone. He pushed off the doorframe. You leave today. Be grateful. Other option is much worse. I didn't understand what he meant until they came for me later that same day. Two men in civilian clothes, one short and stocky with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, the other tall and thin with eyes that looked through me rather than at me. Not military, not FSB, something else entirely. They loaded me into an unmarked van without ceremony, without explanation. I was still wearing the gray shift they'd given me, no shoes, no coat despite the Moscow cold. The city passed by outside the windows, people going about their lives, cafes and shops open, traffic flowing normally, as if the world hadn't just ended, as if my husband and his entire family hadn't been murdered, as if I wasn't being transported by men who worked for the Russian mob to be sold like livestock, because that's what they were. I understood it now, piecing it together from context and the cold reality of my situation. The FSB had sold me to organized crime. Or maybe they were one and the same here. I didn't know. I didn't understand how any of this worked. The van pulled up to a building in what looked like an industrial area. Warehouses and factories, mostly empty streets. They hustled me inside quickly, down a hallway that smelled of cigarettes and sweat and fear, into a room where 6 other women were already waiting. We were in various states of trauma. Some looked drugged, barely conscious, their eyes unfocused. Others were crying quietly or openly. One woman just stared at the wall, her eyes completely dead despite still breathing. She was the one who scared me most, the proof that you could survive something and still be destroyed by it. A woman I would later learn was named Elvira came in and assessed us with the clinical detachment of a livestock trader evaluating cattle at market. She was older, maybe 60, with dyed blonde hair and too much makeup and cold eyes that had seen everything and been moved by nothing. She issued instructions in rapid Russian. Another woman, younger, maybe 30, translated into broken English for those of us who didn't understand. You will be cleaned, dressed, prepared for auction. Tonight, men will bid on you. You will go to highest bidder. These are rules. If you fight, you will be hurt. If you try to run, you will be killed. If you cooperate, your life will be easier. These are your only choices. Understand? We all understood. What choice did we have? They took us to a bathroom, industrial, sterile, with multiple showers and no privacy. They made us strip while guards watched, their eyes cataloging our bodies with the same detachment as Elvira. They made us shower with harsh soap that smelled like chemicals, waxed us, plucked our eyebrows, applied makeup with rough efficiency, more than I'd ever worn in my life, turning us into dolls, objects, commodities. They dressed us in lingerie that left nothing to the imagination. I got a black lace teddy that was simultaneously too tight across my breasts and too loose around my waist, with garters and stockings that made me feel like a caricature, like a costume, like something less than human. One of the other women, a girl really, couldn't have been older than 20, started crying when they put her in white lace, and Elvira slapped her hard across the face. "No crying," she said in English. "Ruins makeup, ruins sale. You cry, you get beaten, understand?" The girl nodded, tears still streaming down her face, but silent now. They lined us up according to some criteria I didn't understand. Age, maybe, or perceived attractiveness, or ethnicity. I was fifth in a line of 8. The woman ahead of me couldn't have been older than 22, with dark hair and terrified brown eyes that kept darting around looking for escape. The woman behind me was closer to 40, with bruises on her arms she tried to hide, and a resignation in her eyes that suggested she'd given up fighting. They led us to a stage. An actual stage with red velvet curtains and professional lighting, and a crowd of men in expensive suits sitting in rows of chairs like they were at a theater, drinking vodka and champagne from crystal glasses, smoking cigarettes and cigars, laughing and talking as if they were at a social event rather than a human trafficking operation. My mind couldn't process it, couldn't reconcile the civilized veneer, the suits, the champagne, the classical music playing softly in the background, with the horror of what was actually happening. We were being sold, like slaves, like property, in the 21st century in the capital of a major world power, and no one was stopping it. Because no one cared. Because we didn't matter. Because we'd been deemed worthless by everyone who might have saved us. We waited behind the curtain while Elvira spoke to the crowd, warming them up, explaining the merchandise. I couldn't understand most of her Russian, but I caught words here and there. Fresh, clean, variety, investment. Then the auction began. One by one, we were paraded out onto the stage. The lights were blinding, so bright I couldn't see the men's faces clearly, just shapes and suits. The auctioneer, a man in his 50s with slicked back hair and a voice that carried, called out descriptions in Russian. The first woman went for 90,000 American dollars. I heard the number clearly despite my lack of Russian because he said it in English too. These men wanted to know exactly what they were paying. The second woman went for 65,000, then 80,000. Then the young dark-haired girl in front of me, the one with the terrified eyes, went for 120,000. I watched her being led off the stage by a man who looked old enough to be her grandfather, his hand already on her ass, already claiming his purchase. She was sobbing, and no one cared. Then it was my turn. The auctioneer called me forward with a gesture, and I walked on shaking legs to the center of the stage. The lights were even more blinding up close, hot against my skin. I stood there in my black lace teddy and stockings, essentially naked, while men I couldn't see evaluated me like a piece of meat. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the space. I caught key words to my terror. American, 31, educated, wife, widow. They were selling my tragedy along with my body. The dead husband made me more interesting, apparently, more valuable. The bidding started at $30,000, then 40, 50, 60. I stood there, shaking, trying to disappear inside my own mind, trying to go somewhere else, anywhere else, trying to think about anything except the reality of strange men bidding on the right to own me, to use me, to do whatever they wanted with me because I'd been declared worthless by everyone else. 75,000, 80,000, 90,000. The bids kept climbing, and I couldn't understand why. I wasn't young enough or beautiful enough or exotic enough to warrant this kind of attention. I was 31 and average and broken and probably looked as destroyed as I felt. What were they seeing that made me worth so much? 100,000, 125, 150. The auctioneer's voice rose with excitement, feeding off the competition. I scanned the crowd desperately, trying to identify who was bidding, trying to see the face of whoever would own me. But the lights made it impossible. Just a mass of men in suits, drinking and smoking and buying women like we were nothing. 175,000, 185, 190, then a new voice, deep and authoritative, cutting through the crowd noise like a blade. 200,000. The room went quiet. Even the auctioneer paused, clearly surprised. 200,000 was significantly more than any other woman had gone for tonight, possibly more than anyone had paid at this auction in months or years. $200,000, the voice repeated in English, though heavily accented with Russian. American dollars. Final offer. Take it or I walk. The auctioneer looked around, waiting to see if anyone would counter. The silence stretched. At that price, apparently, I was no longer worth the competition. Whatever these men had seen in me, it wasn't worth $200,000. Sold, the auctioneer announced, bringing his gavel down with a sharp crack that made me flinch. To Mr. Petrushev, 200,000 American dollars for lot number 5. They led me off the stage immediately, through a door at the back into a room where the sales were finalized. It looked almost normal, an office with a desk and chairs, a computer, filing cabinets, like this was a legitimate business transaction rather than human trafficking. The man who'd bought me was already there, signing papers, transferring funds through some kind of electronic system. I watched him without really seeing him, my mind still trying to process what had just happened, what was about to happen. When he finished and turned to look at me, I finally saw my buyer clearly for the first time. Sergei Petrushev was in his mid-40s, tall and lean with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, never been denied anything he wanted. Dark hair graying elegantly at the temples, sharp aristocratic features, high cheekbones, strong jaw, straight nose. Eyes that were light-colored, maybe gray or pale blue, I couldn't quite tell in the office lighting. Eyes that assessed me with an intelligence that was somehow more terrifying than pure cruelty would have been. He was dressed impeccably, a charcoal gray suit that looked hand-tailored, probably Italian. A watch that caught the light, gold or platinum, definitely expensive. Shoes so polished I could probably see my reflection in them. A shirt that was crisp white, probably custom made. Everything about him screamed wealth, power, taste. He looked like old money, like the kind of man who appeared in Forbes magazine, like someone who owned buildings and companies and politicians, like someone who was accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted, when he wanted it, however he wanted it. And now he owned me. He spoke to Elvira in rapid Russian, some kind of instructions or questions about paperwork or delivery or God knows what. His voice was cultured, educated, the accent of someone who'd probably studied abroad, who spoke multiple languages fluently. Then he turned back to me, and those pale eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made me feel naked in a way that had nothing to do with the lingerie. "Do you speak Russian?" he asked in English, his accent noticeable but his grammar perfect. I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "English, then." He stepped closer, and I forced myself not to flinch, not to step back. "I am Sergei Petrushev. You belong to me now, purchased legally according to the laws of this organization and the reality of your situation. Do you understand?" I understood that the world had gone insane, that I was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no waking, that my husband was dead, his family was dead, my old life was dead, and I was now owned by a Russian oligarch who just paid $200,000 for the privilege of doing whatever he wanted with me. "Yes," I whispered, the word barely audible. He studied me for another long moment, his expression unreadable. Not cruel, but not kind either, just assessing. Like he was trying to determine exactly what he purchased, whether I was worth the premium price he'd paid. "You're in shock," he observed clinically. "That's understandable. It will pass. Or it won't, and we'll deal with that when necessary." He turned to one of the men who'd been standing silently by the door. Security, probably. "Take her to the car. I'll be there momentarily." Hands grabbed my arms before I could react. Not gentle, but not brutal either. Just efficient, practiced. They started pulling me toward the exit. I looked back at Sergei Petrushev, at the man who now owned me, and our eyes met one last time. He was watching me with that same clinical assessment, that same unreadable expression. Then I was out the door, being led down another hallway, through another door, into a garage where a black Mercedes waited. They put me in the back seat, closed the door, and I heard the locks engage. I sat there in my black lace lingerie and stockings, no coat against the Moscow cold, and watched through the window as Sergei Petrushev emerged from the building. He moved with unhurried confidence, like a man who had all the time in the world because time bent to his will, not the other way around. He got into the driver's seat, adjusted the mirror, started the engine. "We're going home," he said, as if that word had any meaning anymore, as if I had a home, as if anything about this situation was normal. Then we pulled out of the garage and into the Moscow night, and I watched the city pass by outside the window, lights and people and life continuing normally, while inside the car, my new existence began. Whatever that would mean, whatever he would make it mean, I was his property now, bought and paid for, $200,000 worth of human being, and I had absolutely no idea what came next.
Chapter 2. I hadn't planned to attend the auction tonight, My assistant Mikhail had mentioned it in passing during our morning briefing, one of those events that existed in the gray spaces between legal and illegal, the kind of thing that powerful men in Moscow pretended not to know about while simultaneously knowing exactly when and where they happened. I'd been to a few over the years, more out of curiosity than genuine interest. The merchandise was usually disappointing. Girls too young or too used, desperate refugees or drug addicts, nothing that appealed to me. But business had been tedious lately. The sanctions from the West were creating complications with my European operations. My petrochemical plants were running smoothly, profits were strong, but the political machinations required to keep everything functioning were exhausting. I needed a distraction, something to break the monotony. So I told Mikhail to prepare the car. The venue was in an industrial district, anonymous and forgettable, the kind of place that wouldn't draw attention, that city officials had been paid to ignore. Security was tight, men with rifles checking invitations, scanning for weapons, ensuring discretion. Inside, the space had been transformed into something almost civilized: red velvet curtains, professional lighting, rows of chairs for the buyers, crystal glasses of champagne and vodka, lipstick on a pig, as the Americans would say. I took a seat in the back row, away from the eager men crowding the front. I recognized several of them. Fellow oligarchs, politicians, a few foreign businessmen who'd come to Moscow for opportunities that didn't exist in their more regulated countries. Men with money and power and appetites they could indulge here without consequence. Elvira appeared on stage, that old vulture, and began her pitch. I half listened, sipping my vodka, wondering why I'd bothered coming. This would be like all the others, mediocre merchandise sold to desperate men. Then the auction began. The first few women were exactly what I'd expected. Young, yes, but hollow-eyed, broken before they'd even arrived here. They'd fetched decent prices from men who preferred their property already traumatized, already compliant. Not my taste. I preferred women with some fight left in them, some spirit. Something to break myself rather than purchasing something already shattered. The fourth woman was different. Dark-haired, young, terrified, but still present somehow. She went for 120,000 to Alexander Volkov, that old lecher. I watched her being led off stage, sobbing, and felt nothing. This was the world. This was how it worked. Sentiment was for the weak. Then the fifth woman walked onto the stage, and something made me sit forward. She was older than the others. The auctioneer announced 31, which was ancient by auction standards, not traditionally beautiful either. Average height, average build, pretty enough but not stunning. Honey blonde hair that had been styled but still looked somewhat plain. Brown eyes that were wide with fear but also something else. Intelligence, awareness, a mind still functioning behind the terror. She was American, the auctioneer emphasized this, clearly thinking it added value. A dietitian, educated, recently widowed, her Ukrainian husband killed in the fighting in Bucha just weeks ago. She'd been taken prisoner, deemed worthless by her own government, and ended up here. The story was compelling, yes, but it was her eyes that held my attention. The way she stood there in her black lace lingerie, shaking but not collapsing. The way she was clearly trying to dissociate, to escape mentally from what was happening to her body. The way she was simultaneously present and absent, broken but not destroyed. She was a puzzle, a contradiction, and I'd always enjoyed puzzles. The bidding started low, 30,000. These idiots couldn't see what I saw. They only noticed her age, her average looks, her obvious trauma. They didn't see the potential underneath. I waited, watching the numbers climb. 50,000, 75, 100. Still low, still insulting really for what she was. The bidding slowed around 190,000. The men were losing interest, deciding she wasn't worth more than that. Fools. I made my decision. 200,000, I said clearly, my voice cutting through the murmurs. The room went silent. Men turned to look at me, surprised. 200,000 was premium pricing for auction merchandise. Nearly double what the pretty young girl before her had gone for. $200,000, I repeated in English, knowing it would carry more weight. American dollars. Final offer. Take it or I walk. I didn't say the last part out of negotiation. I said it because I meant it. Either they accepted my price for this particular woman, or I'd leave and find my distraction elsewhere. I wasn't interested in bargaining. The auctioneer waited, letting the silence stretch, giving other bidders a chance to counter. No one did. At that price, I'd successfully intimidated them out of the competition. Sold, the auctioneer announced, to Mr. Petrushev, 200,000 American dollars. I rose from my seat and made my way to the back room where the transactions were finalized. Elvira was already there with her paperwork, her cash-counting machines, her infrastructure of human trafficking dressed up as legitimate business. "Mr. Petrushev," she said with her reptilian smile, "always a pleasure. You have excellent taste as usual. The American is quality merchandise. Educated, clean, healthy. Good investment." "We'll see," I said, signing the document she pushed across the desk. Digital transfer of funds, cryptocurrency untraceable, the modern way of conducting ancient business. $200,000 moved from my account to the organization's in seconds. The woman, my woman now, my property, was brought in. She looked even more lost up close, her eyes unfocused, her body language screaming trauma. She was still wearing only the black lingerie from the stage, no coat despite the Moscow cold. Someone had thought to put her in heels, but they were too large and she walked unsteadily. I studied her for a moment. Up close I could see the bruising around her wrists where zip ties had been, the hollow quality to her cheeks that spoke of weight loss, the way she held herself, protective and defeated simultaneously. But also, I could see the bone structure underneath, the potential. This woman had been attractive once, before the war and trauma, could be attractive again with proper care. Would be interesting to watch that transformation, to see if I could bring her back from wherever she'd retreated to. "Do you speak Russian?" I asked her. She shook her head. "English, then. Good. My English is adequate." I stepped closer, watching for her reaction. She flinched slightly but held her ground. Good. Still some spine left. "I am Sergei Petrushev. You belong to me now, purchased legally according to the laws of this organization and the reality of your situation. Do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered. The word was barely audible, but I heard it. Heard the defeat in it, but also the awareness. She understood what had happened to her, was present enough to comprehend her situation. That was important. I had no interest in owning a broken doll. I wanted a person, someone capable of genuine reaction, genuine emotion, someone capable of genuine resistance if it came to that. "You're in shock," I observed. "That's understandable. It will pass, or it won't, and we'll deal with that when necessary." I turned to my security. "Take her to the car. I'll be there momentarily." I watched them lead her away, noting the way she looked back at me. Not pleading, not hopeful, just trying to understand who and what I was, trying to assess her captor. Smart woman. That would make things more interesting. I finished the paperwork with Elvira, declined her offer of additional services, and made my way out to where the Mercedes waited. The woman, I realized I didn't even know her name yet, hadn't thought to ask, was already in the back seat, locked in, staring out the window with that same 1,000-yard stare. I got into the driver's seat. I'd sent my driver home earlier, preferring privacy for this particular errand. Started the engine. Adjusted the mirror so I could see her face. "We're going home," I said. Then I pulled out into Moscow traffic, my newest acquisition silent and shaking in the back seat, and I wondered if I'd made a brilliant investment or an expensive mistake. Time would tell.
The penthouse was on the top floor of a building in the heart of Moscow, the kind of building where apartments sold for tens of millions of dollars, where security was invisible but omnipresent, where oligarchs and politicians kept their mistresses and second families. Sergei had driven in silence, offering no explanation or reassurance. The car had been warm, expensive leather seats and climate control, but I couldn't stop shaking, not from cold, from shock, from the reality of what had just happened settling into my bones. I'd been sold, like property, like a slave, in the 21st century, and the man who'd bought me, Sergei Petrushev, had paid $200,000 for the privilege. I didn't know what that meant. Didn't know if it was good or bad that he paid so much. Maybe it meant he valued me somehow, would treat me well, or maybe it meant he had specific plans, specific uses that required him to pay premium pricing. I didn't want to think about what those uses might be. The building's underground garage was pristine, well lit, filled with expensive cars. Sergei parked in a spot marked with his name, got out, and opened my door. When I didn't move immediately, he extended his hand. "Come," he said, not unkindly, but not gently either. Just a statement of expectation. I took his hand because I had no choice, let him help me out of the car. My legs were unsteady in the two large heels, and I stumbled. His other hand caught my elbow, steadying me. The shoes don't fit, he observed. We'll fix that tomorrow. He led me to a private elevator, the kind that required a key card to operate. The elevator was mirrored on all sides, and I caught sight of myself for the first time since the auction. I looked like someone else, like a stranger. The heavy makeup, the black lace lingerie, the styled hair. It was all a costume, something worn by the kind of woman who got sold at auctions. But underneath, I could still see traces of who I used to be. Meredith Harris, dietitian from Oregon, woman who thought she was starting her real life. That woman was gone now. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. The space was enormous, modern, decorated in shades of gray and white and black with occasional touches of dark blue. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed Moscow spread out below us, the city lights glittering like fallen stars. The furniture was minimalist but clearly expensive, leather and chrome and glass. Art on the walls that was probably worth more than I'd earned in my entire life. It was beautiful, sterile, cold. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a showroom, a display of wealth rather than a place where someone actually lived. This is the main living area, Sergey said, his tone almost tour guide-like. Kitchen there. My office is down that hallway, off limits unless I invite you. Your room is this way. He led me down a different hallway, past closed doors, to a room at the end. He opened it, gestured for me to enter. The room was large, probably bigger than my entire apartment had been in Oregon. A king-size bed with white linens, a dresser, a desk, another door that presumably led to a bathroom. More floor-to-ceiling windows, these with curtains that were currently open, showing more of the Moscow skyline. It was nice, comfortable, and absolutely a prison. The bathroom has everything you need, Sergey continued. Tomorrow, Polina will come. She's my housekeeper. She speaks some English. She'll take your measurements, get you proper clothes and necessities. For tonight, there are robes in the closet. He walked to a panel on the wall and pressed something. Heavy curtains began to close automatically, blocking out the city lights, leaving us in the soft glow of recessed lighting. The door doesn't lock from the inside, he said, and my stomach dropped. Obviously, you belong to me now. There are no secrets, no privacy unless I choose to give it. But for tonight, you'll sleep, rest, recover. We'll discuss expectations tomorrow. He started to leave, then paused in the doorway. What's your name? He asked. Your real name? I saw it on the paperwork, but I'd prefer to hear it from you. Meredith, I said quietly. Meredith Harris. Well, Meredith Voronin now, I guess. I took my husband's name. Something flickered across his face, interest maybe, or calculation. Meredith Voronin, the American who married a Ukrainian and lost everything. He seemed to consider this. You may use whichever name you prefer here. It doesn't matter to me. You're mine regardless of what you're called. Then he left, closing the door behind him. I stood there in the middle of this beautiful prison, wearing nothing but lingerie and ill-fitting heels, and tried to process what had just happened. Tried to understand my new reality. I'd been purchased. I belonged to Sergei Petrushev now, a man I knew nothing about except that he had enough money to pay $200,000 for a woman at an auction. A man who lived in a penthouse that probably cost more money than I could comprehend. A man who spoke of ownership casually, as if buying human beings was just another business transaction. What did he want from me? Sex, obviously. That was always part of this equation. But what else? Why pay so much for me specifically? What had he seen in me that made me worth that premium price? I didn't know, and I was terrified to find out. Eventually, I moved, kicked off the heels that had been cutting into my feet, found the bathroom he'd mentioned. It was enormous, all marble and chrome and glass, with a shower that could fit 4 people and a tub that looked more like a small pool. There were towels, robes, toiletries, everything I might need. I caught sight of myself in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. The makeup made me look like someone else, like a prostitute, like merchandise. I turned on the shower as hot as I could stand and stepped under the spray, scrubbed at my skin, trying to remove the makeup, the feel of strange hands that had touched me during processing, the scent of the auction house. The water turned gray with foundation and mascara, and I scrubbed harder, scrubbed until my skin was red and raw. But I couldn't scrub away what had happened, couldn't wash off the reality that I was property now, that my life as I'd known it was over. When the water finally started to run cold, I got out, dried off with towels that were softer than anything I'd ever owned, found a robe in the closet, white, plush, enormous on my frame, wrapped myself in it like armor. The bed was calling to me. I hadn't slept in a real bed since before the invasion, had spent weeks on a concrete floor or a thin cot, but I was afraid to sleep, afraid of what might happen if I let my guard down. Still, exhaustion eventually won. I climbed into the bed, and the mattress was so soft I almost sank into it. The sheets smelled clean, like expensive detergent and something else. Something masculine. Had Sergei slept in this bed? Was this his room normally? Or was this specifically a room for whatever women he brought home? I didn't want to think about it. I pulled the covers up to my chin and stared at the ceiling, and eventually, despite everything, I fell asleep. I woke to sunlight streaming through gaps in the curtains and a woman's voice speaking softly in Russian. I jerked upright, disoriented, momentarily forgetting where I was. Then it all came crashing back. The auction, Sergei, the penthouse, my new reality. The woman standing in the doorway was older, maybe 60, with gray streaked hair pulled back in a bun and kind eyes. She was holding a tray with what looked like breakfast. "Good morning," she said in heavily accented English. "I am Polina. Mr. Petrushev asked me to bring you food, help you prepare for the day." She set the tray on the desk: coffee, toast, eggs, fruit, real food. My stomach growled despite my anxiety. "He also asked me to take measurements," Polina continued, pulling a measuring tape from her pocket, "for clothes, and to help you understand house rules." I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the robe around myself. What are the rules? Polina's expression softened with something like sympathy. "Mr. Petrushev is not cruel man, but he is man who expects obedience. You are to stay in penthouse unless he says otherwise. You are to be available when he wants you. You are to be clean, presentable, pleasant. You do these things, your life will be comfortable. You resist," she shrugged. "He does not like resistance." "And if I resist anyway?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. "Then you will be punished," Polina said simply. "How? I do not know. He has not had woman here before, not like this. But Mr. Petrushev always gets what he wants. Always. Better to accept this now." He hadn't had a woman here before? That surprised me. I'd assumed he did this regularly, bought women at auctions, kept them for whatever purposes he had. "Eat," Polina urged, gesturing to the breakfast. "Then I measure you. Then we see what Mr. Petrushev wants." The food was good, better than good. The coffee was rich and perfectly made. The eggs were fluffy. The fruit was fresh. Despite everything, I ate hungrily, my body demanding fuel even as my mind reeled. After breakfast, Paulina measured me efficiently: bust, waist, hips, inseam, arm length. She made notes in a small notebook, nodding to herself. "I will order clothes today," she said. "They will arrive tomorrow, maybe next day. For now, Mr. Petrushev left these." She gestured to a shopping bag I hadn't noticed by the door. Inside were yoga pants, a soft t-shirt, underwear still in packaging, and slippers, all in approximately my size. When had he gotten these? Last night after I'd fallen asleep? This morning? Had he gone shopping himself or sent someone? I changed in the bathroom, grateful to be in real clothes, even if they'd been provided by my captor. When I emerged, Polina was tidying the room. "Mr. Petrushev is in his office," she said. "He wants to see you when you are ready. I will take you." My heart hammered as I followed her down the hallway. The penthouse looked different in daylight. Still beautiful, still sterile, but more real somehow. I could see details I'd missed last night. Books on shelves, a few personal photographs in frames, evidence that someone actually lived here. Polina knocked on a door, then opened it when a voice called out in Russian. Sergei's office was smaller than I'd expected, but still impressive. A large desk with multiple monitors, bookshelves lined with volumes in Russian and English. More art on the walls, these pieces darker, more abstract, and Sergei himself sitting behind the desk in a casual shirt and slacks, looking somehow more intimidating without the formal suit. He looked up when we entered, his pale eyes finding me immediately. "Thank you, Polina," he said in English. "You can go." She left, closing the door behind her, and suddenly I was alone with my owner. "Sit," Sergei said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. I sat, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. He studied me for a long moment, and I forced myself to meet his gaze despite wanting to look away. His eyes were gray, I could see now in the natural light, gray and intelligent and completely unreadable. "How did you sleep?" he asked. "Fine," I lied. A slight smile touched his lips. "Liar. But that's all right. You'll sleep better as you adjust." He leaned back in his chair. "We need to discuss the terms of your residence here." "Terms," I repeated flatly. "I'm your property." "What terms are there?" "Quite a few, actually," he said. "I'm not interested in keeping a prisoner, Meredith. I'm interested in something more complex. So here are the rules. You will live in this penthouse. You will not attempt to leave without my permission. You will not attempt to contact anyone from your previous life. Your family, friends, no one. Those connections are severed." Each word felt like a nail in a coffin. "You will maintain yourself," he continued. "Stay healthy, clean, presentable. Polina will help with whatever you need. You'll have access to most of the penthouse, the living areas, kitchen, your room. My office and bedroom are off limits unless I invite you." "And what do you want from me?" I asked, proud that my voice didn't shake. "I spend most evenings here working or reading or simply existing. I'd like company, someone to talk to, eat dinner with, share space with. Someone intelligent enough to hold a conversation." I stared at him. "You paid $200,000 for a dinner companion." "Among other things," he said, and there was something in his tone that made my stomach clench. "Yes, Meredith, I expect we'll be intimate. I'm not a monk, but I'm not particularly interested in forcing myself on a terrified woman either. That's boring, predictable. I prefer willing participation." "I'll never be willing," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. He smiled, and it was neither kind nor cruel, just amused. "Never is a long time. We'll see." He stood, came around the desk, and I forced myself not to shrink back. "I understand this is traumatic. I understand you've lost everything. Your husband, his family, your freedom, your country. You have every right to hate me, to hate this situation. I'm not asking you to be grateful or happy." "Then what are you asking?" "Compliance," he said. "Civility, presence. In return, I'll provide everything you need: safety, comfort, food, clothing, medical care if necessary. You'll never want for anything material." And he paused. "If you're very good, very compliant, very pleasant, perhaps eventually we can discuss other arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" "That depends on how this goes," he said. "But I'm not cruel by nature, Meredith. I don't enjoy suffering. If you can adapt to this new reality, if you can find a way to make peace with your situation, your life here could be quite comfortable." "I'll be a prisoner in a gilded cage," I said bitterly. "Better than a prisoner in an actual cage," he countered. "Better than what would have happened if someone else had bought you. Do you know Alexander Volkov? The man who bought the young dark-haired girl before you? He's known for his tastes. Likes them young, likes them scared, likes to hurt them. You could have ended up with him, or worse." He was right, and I hated that he was right. "Give this a chance," Sergey said, his voice almost gentle. "Give yourself a chance to adjust. It won't be as terrible as you think. I promise you that." "Can I ask you something?" I said quietly. "Of course. Why me? Why pay so much for me specifically? I'm too old, too plain, too broken. What did you see that made me worth $200,000? He considered the question, his head tilting slightly. "Potential," he said finally. "I saw potential. Intelligence behind the fear. Strength beneath the trauma. And I saw someone who could be interesting, who could be more than just a warm body. I have enough money that 200,000 is negligible. What I don't have enough of is genuine interest, genuine curiosity. You interest me. Whether that interest was worth the price remains to be seen." He returned to his desk, sat down, picked up some papers. "Polina will show you the rest of the penthouse. Make yourself comfortable. Dinner is at 7. I expect you at the table, presentable and civil. Understood?" "Understood," I whispered. "Good. You're dismissed." I fled the office, found Polina waiting in the hallway, and let her show me the rest of my prison. The days began to blur together in a strange routine. I woke each morning in the bedroom that wasn't mine, but wasn't anyone else's either. Polina would bring breakfast, sometimes with small additions: a pastry from a bakery Sergey liked, fresh flowers for the room, magazines in English. Small gestures that might have been kind if they hadn't been part of my captivity. Clothes arrived, expensive, well-made, in styles I might have chosen for myself in another life. Jeans and sweaters, dresses for evening, comfortable loungewear. Everything fit perfectly, evidence of Polina's careful measurements. I was given freedom to move through most of the penthouse, the living room with its enormous television and uncomfortable modern furniture, the kitchen, which was state of the art but I barely used because Polina cooked most meals, a small library filled with books in Russian and English. I gravitated there, desperate for escape, even if only mental. But certain areas remained forbidden. Sergei's bedroom at the end of the opposite hallway, his office. The front door, which was locked with a security system I couldn't bypass even if I'd tried. Every evening at 7, I had dinner with Sergei. These dinners were surreal. We'd sit at his dining table while Polina served beautifully prepared meals, and we'd eat and talk like we were on some kind of bizarre date instead of captive and captor. He asked about my life before in my work, my family, my interests. I answered mechanically at first, giving minimal responses, but he was patient and persistent. He told me about his business, the petrochemical company he'd built from a small operation into a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, about navigating Russian politics, about the sanctions that complicated his European operations, about the endless chess game of maintaining wealth and power in Putin's Russia. He was intelligent, I realized reluctantly. Well-read, well-traveled. He spoke 4 languages fluently. He had opinions on literature and art and politics that were nuanced and considered. In another life, in another context, I might have found him interesting, but he was my captor, my owner, the man who'd bought me like property. After dinner, we'd sometimes sit in the living room. He'd work on his laptop or read. I'd read my own books, hyper-aware of his presence, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for him to demand the intimacy he'd said he expected. But he didn't. Not the first night, not the second, not the third. A week passed, then 2, and he never touched me beyond casual gestures. A hand on my elbow when guiding me somewhere, fingers brushing mine when handing me something. Nothing aggressive, nothing sexual. It was confusing, unsettling. I didn't know what game he was playing. "Why aren't you?" I asked one night after dinner, unable to hold the question in any longer. He looked up from his laptop. "Why aren't I what?" "Forcing yourself on me. Isn't that what men like you do? You bought me. You own me. Why haven't you—" "Because I'm not interested in rape, Meredith. I told you that. I prefer willing participation." "I'll never be willing," I said again. "So you keep saying," he replied, "but your body is already betraying you. You're eating better, sleeping better. Some of the hollowness is leaving your face. You're recovering, healing. And as you heal, your mind will follow. You'll start to see the situation differently." "I'll see being property differently?" I asked incredulously. "You'll see having comfort and safety differently," he corrected. "You'll start to weigh what you have here against what you lost. And eventually, you'll realize that what you have here isn't actually that terrible, that I'm not actually that terrible." "You bought me at an auction. I saved you from much worse," he countered. "Context matters, Meredith. Yes, the situation is objectively horrifying. But within that horror, I'm offering you the best possible version. Food, safety, comfort, respect, even. How many of the other women from that auction can say the same?" I didn't have an answer for that. "I can wait," Sergey said, returning his attention to his laptop. "I'm a patient man. And when you finally do come to me, because you will eventually, it will be so much more satisfying knowing you chose it." "I would never choose this," I whispered. He just smiled. 3 weeks into my captivity, I made my first mistake. I'd been exploring the penthouse more boldly, testing boundaries without explicitly breaking them. The library had become my refuge, hours spent reading, losing myself in other worlds, other lives, anything to escape my reality. That afternoon, I'd found a laptop tucked behind some books, old, probably forgotten. I'd opened it carefully, heart hammering, and found it wasn't password protected. It booted up slowly, the operating system years out of date, but it worked. And it had internet access. I could contact my family, could send an email to Shirley, to my mother, to someone telling them I was alive, that I was in Moscow, that I needed help. My hands shook as I opened a browser, navigated to Gmail, started composing a message to my mother. "Mom, it's me. I'm alive. I'm in Moscow. I've been— What are you doing?" I spun around so fast the laptop nearly fell. Sergey stood in the library doorway, his expression cold in a way I hadn't seen before. I I was just— You were just violating one of the very few rules I gave you," he said quietly, walking toward me. "No contact with your previous life. That was explicitly stated. I just wanted to tell them I'm alive, I said, tears springing to my eyes. They think I'm dead. My mother thinks I'm dead. I just wanted. He took the laptop from my trembling hands, closed it, tucked it under his arm. And if you contact them, what happens? They try to find you. They contact authorities, perhaps even the American embassy. And then what? At best, nothing happens because you're here illegally, because your government already abandoned you. At worst, attention is drawn to me, to this building, to activities I prefer to keep private. And that attention has consequences. I'm sorry, I whispered. Are you? He set the laptop aside and stepped closer. Or are you just sorry you got caught? I didn't answer. I've been very patient with you, Meredith, he said, his voice still quiet but edged with something harder. I've given you space, time, comfort. I've asked very little in return. But there are rules, and those rules exist for reasons. They're not suggestions. What are you going to do to me? I asked, hating the fear in my voice. He considered me for a long moment. That depends. Do you understand why what you just tried to do was unacceptable? Do you genuinely understand, or are you just scared of punishment? I understand, I said. You want to keep me secret, hidden. If people know I'm here, it complicates things for you. Partially, he said. But also, Meredith, you need to let go of your old life. Clinging to it only makes this harder for you. Your family believes you're dead. That's painful, but it's also a kindness in its way. They can grieve and move on. If you contact them, you give them false hope. You make them suffer more. Is that really what you want? I hadn't thought of it that way, hadn't considered that maybe silence was actually mercy. I want to go home, I said, my voice breaking. I want my old life back. I want Slava back. I want everything to be the way it was supposed to be. I know, Sergei said, and for the first time his tone held something like genuine sympathy. But that's impossible. That life is gone. That man is dead. Your country won't claim you. You have nothing to go back to. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can start building a new life, here, with me, as your property. As my companion, he corrected. The legal terminology is irrelevant. What matters is how we actually exist together. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, the gesture almost tender. I flinched but didn't pull away. You broke a rule, he said softly. That requires consequences. But I'm not cruel, Meredith. I don't want to hurt you. So here's what's going to happen. For the next week, you'll be restricted to your room except for meals. No library, no living room. No freedom to wander. Polina will bring you books if you want them, but you'll stay confined. That's your punishment. Time to think about what you tried to do and why it was wrong. Understood? Understood, I whispered. Good. He picked up the laptop. And this is going away, obviously. He left me standing in the library, and I sank down onto the couch and cried. Not because of the punishment, that was mild, almost kind compared to what he could have done, but because he was right. I had nothing to go back to. No home, no husband, no country willing to claim me. I was truly trapped. The week of confinement was harder than I'd expected. Not because the room was uncomfortable, it wasn't, but because the isolation gave me too much time to think, too much time to remember, too much time to confront the reality that Sergei had articulated so clearly. My old life was gone, completely, irretrievably gone. Slava was dead. I'd watched him die. His family was dead. My marriage, all 2 weeks of it, had ended in blood and horror. And my own country had looked at my paperwork and decided I wasn't worth the diplomatic trouble of saving. I was no one, nothing, stateless, homeless, alone. Except I wasn't alone. I had Sergei, my owner, my captor, the man who'd paid $200,000 because he saw potential in me. What did that even mean? Polina brought me meals, books, small comforts. She never commented on my red eyes or the way I barely touched the food for the first few days. Just quietly cleared the trays and left fresh ones. Like she understood that sometimes processing trauma required time and silence. On the fourth day of my confinement, she brought me a photograph. Mr. Petrushev thought you might want this, she said, setting it on my desk. He had someone retrieve it from before. It was a photo from my wedding. Slava and me, standing in front of his family's apartment building, both of us smiling, his arm around my waist, my head leaning against his shoulder. We looked so happy, so hopeful, so stupidly unaware of what was coming. I stared at it for a long time after Polina left, traced Slava's face with my finger, tried to remember what his voice had sounded like, what his laugh had sounded like, what it had felt like to be held by someone who loved me. The memories were already fading. It had only been weeks, but the trauma had burned holes in my recollection. I could remember moments, the way he proposed, the feel of the ring sliding onto my finger, the sound of the gunshot, but the connective tissue was disappearing. Soon, all I'd have left were fragments. And this photograph, this single image of a life that had lasted 2 weeks, I cried over it for hours, cried for Slava, for his family, for the future we'd never have. Cried for myself, for the woman I'd been, for the innocence and hope that had died in Buka. But when I was done crying, when I'd exhausted myself completely, I realized something. Sergei had given me this photograph. He hadn't had to. Could have left it wherever it had been, let that piece of my past stay buried. But he'd sent someone to retrieve it, had it brought to me, let me grieve. That was not kind, exactly, but not cruel either. It was something else, something more complicated. On the seventh day, Sergei came to my room in the evening. I was sitting on the bed, reading one of the books Polina had brought me, and looked up when he knocked. He'd never knocked before, never given me that small courtesy of warning. Your confinement is over, he said from the doorway. You can resume normal activities tomorrow, but I wanted to talk to you first. I set the book aside. Okay. He came in, closed the door behind him, and sat in the chair at my desk. Not on the bed with me, maintaining that distance, that boundary. Have you thought about what I said? He asked, about letting go of your old life. Yes, I said quietly, I have. And you're right, I admitted, the words tasting like ash. There's nothing to go back to. Even if I could escape, even if I could get out of Russia, what would I do? Where would I go? I have no money, no documents. My family thinks I'm dead. My husband is dead. I'm nothing. You're not nothing, Sergei said firmly. You're here. You're alive. That's something. I'm your property, I said. That's not the same as being alive. Then redefine what being alive means, he said. You can spend every day fighting against reality, making yourself miserable, refusing to adapt. Or you can accept what is and find ways to make it bearable, maybe even pleasant. How do I do that? I asked, genuinely curious. How do I make peace with being owned? He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. By recognizing that ownership isn't what you think it is. Yes, legally, according to the organization that sold you, you're my property. But in practical terms, you're a person living in my home, eating at my table, sharing my space. We can define this relationship however we want. You said you expect intimacy, I reminded him. Eventually, he agreed, but I'm not going to force you. When it happens, if it happens, it will be because you choose it. Because you want it, or at least are willing to participate without coercion. Why does that matter to you? I asked. You could just take what you want. You have the power. Why wait for my willingness? He was quiet for a moment, considering. Because I've had enough empty experiences in my life, enough meaningless transactions. I want something real, something that feels like genuine connection, even if the circumstances that brought us together were anything but genuine. That's a romanticized way of describing human trafficking, I said. I know, he acknowledged. I'm not pretending this is a love story, Meredith. I'm not delusional. But within the horror of this situation, I'm trying to create something bearable for both of us. Something that doesn't feel like prisoner and captor every moment of every day. I studied him in the low light of my room. He was handsome. I could acknowledge that objectively. Well built, well dressed, clearly took care of himself. Intelligent, articulate, interesting when he spoke about his work or his interests. In another world, in another context, I might have found him attractive. But this wasn't another world. This was this world where he'd bought me at an auction. What do you want from me right now? I asked. What's the next step in your plan to make me willing? No plan, he said. Just time, just proximity, just getting to know each other. You'll find that I'm not the monster you want me to be, and I'll find out if you're worth the investment I made. We'll see where it goes from there. He stood, moved toward the door, then paused. The photograph. Did it help? Hurt? Both? Both, I said honestly. But thank you for giving it to me. You didn't have to. I know, he said. But grief should be honored, even when it's inconvenient, even when it complicates things. You loved your husband. That's where it's something. Then he left, and I sat in the silence of my room, trying to understand this man who'd bought me but gave me space to grieve. Who demanded compliance but didn't force intimacy? Who was my captor but treated me with something approaching respect? I didn't understand him, and that scared me almost as much as the alternative would have. Life resumed its strange routine after my confinement ended. Dinners with Sergei, quiet evenings in the living room, days spent reading in the library or watching Moscow from the windows. Polina's gentle presence, making sure I ate, making sure I was okay. The nightmares came frequently. I'd wake gasping, seeing Slava fall again, hearing the gunshots, feeling the blood on my hands. Sometimes Sergei heard me. His room was far enough away that he shouldn't have, but the penthouse acoustics must have carried sound. He never came to me during these episodes, never offered comfort. But the next morning, there would always be tea waiting, chamomile, and something else that helped me sleep. Small gestures, small kindnesses, confusing kindnesses. Winter deepened in Moscow. Snow fell heavily, transforming the city into something beautiful and deadly. I watched it from the windows, remembered the brief time I'd spent in Buka before everything fell apart, remembered being excited about experiencing real winter for the first time. That felt like another lifetime. One evening, about 6 weeks into my captivity, Sergei made an announcement over dinner. I have business travel next week, he said. Berlin, then London. I'll be gone for 5 days. My heart jumped. 5 days alone in the penthouse. 5 days to potentially find a way out, to contact someone, to— Polina will stay with you, he continued, reading my thoughts with unnerving accuracy. And the security system will be fully active. Don't try anything foolish, Meredith. The consequences would be severe. I wouldn't, I lied. He smiled slightly. Of course you would. You'd be stupid not to try. But you're smart enough to know it wouldn't work. The building security knows you're here. They know you're not to leave. If you somehow managed to get past the penthouse locks, you wouldn't make it out of the building. And then I'd have to punish you more severely than I'd like. Why tell me you're leaving at all? I asked. Why give me warning? Because I'm not interested in testing your loyalty by setting traps, he said. I'm telling you directly, I'll be gone. You'll be tempted. Don't act on that temptation. The consequences aren't worth it. What would the consequences be? Less freedom in the penthouse, more restrictions, possibly relocation to somewhere less comfortable. His eyes held mine. I don't want to do that, Meredith. I like our current arrangement. But I will if you force my hand. I believed him. That was the terrifying part. I believed he'd follow through. I won't try anything, I said, and this time it might have actually been true. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Good. While I'm gone, Polina has instructions to make sure you're entertained. Movies, books, whatever you need. Consider it a small vacation from my presence. I don't mind your presence, I heard myself say, and immediately wondered why I'd said it. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or satisfaction. No? I searched for the right words. You're not what I expected. When you bought me, I thought— I don't know what I thought, something worse than this. I'll take that as a compliment, he said dryly. It's just an observation, I said. You're still my captor. You still bought me like property, but you're not cruel, not actively sadistic. It's confusing. Would you prefer if I were? He asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. No, I admitted. I just don't know what to do with what you are instead. You don't have to do anything, he said. Just exist. Just be present. The rest will figure itself out. The rest. He meant intimacy. He meant the inevitable progression of whatever this relationship was supposed to be. I wasn't ready. Didn't know if I'd ever be ready. But I also recognized that ready might not be relevant. This was my life now. Sooner or later, I'd have to face all the implications of that. Sergei left for Berlin on a Monday morning. I watched from the windows as his car pulled away from the building, carrying him toward the airport, watched until it disappeared into Moscow traffic. Then I turned to find Polina watching me with sympathy in her eyes. He trusts you, she said quietly. Not many people he trusts. He doesn't trust me, I corrected. He just knows I'm smart enough not to do something stupid. Maybe, Polina said. Or maybe both things are true. The first day alone was strange. The penthouse felt different without Sergei's presence, larger, emptier, more obviously a prison. I wandered through the rooms, testing doors I knew were locked, looking for possibilities I knew didn't exist. The second day, I found myself in his office despite his instructions that it was off limits. The door wasn't locked. Maybe an oversight, maybe a test. I stood in the doorway for a long time, debating. Then I went in. His desk was neat, organized. Papers in stacks, all in Russian or English, mostly business documents. Nothing personal. Nothing that gave me insight into who he really was beneath the oligarch exterior. But his bookshelves did. Photographs in frames showing a younger Sergei with people I assumed were family, parents, maybe siblings, photos from different periods of his life, tracing his evolution from a young man to the person he was now. One photo in particular caught my attention. Sergei, probably in his late 20s, with his arm around a woman. She was beautiful, dark-haired, elegant, smiling up at him with obvious affection. On the back, in faded ink, Katya, 2004. Who was Katya? Wife? Girlfriend? Why was this photo in his office, but no other evidence of her existed in the penthouse? You should not be in here. I spun around. Polina stood in the doorway, her expression troubled. I know, I said. I wanted to understand him better. Understanding Mr. Petrushev is not simple, Polina said. He is a complicated man. Good man in some ways, hard man in others. She gestured for me to leave the office. Come, we should not be here when he returns. Who's Katya? I asked as we left. Polina's expression closed off. That is not my story to tell. If Mr. Petrushev wants you to know, he will tell you. But he wouldn't, I knew. We had this strange relationship where we ate dinner together and talked about surface things but never went deeper, never touched on what actually mattered. Maybe it was time to change that. Sergei returned on Friday evening. I heard the door open, heard his footsteps in the hallway, and felt my stomach clench with an anxiety I didn't fully understand. Was I nervous to see him? Relieved? Both? He appeared in the living room where I was reading, looking tired but pleased. His eyes found me immediately, scanning as if checking that I was still there, still whole, still his. How was your week? He asked, setting down his briefcase. Quiet, I said, uneventful. I read 6 books and watched terrible Russian television that I couldn't understand. Productive, he said with a slight smile. Did you behave yourself? Mostly. His eyebrows raised. Mostly? I went in your office, I admitted. I know I wasn't supposed to, but I was curious. I expected anger, expected punishment. Instead, he just looked thoughtful. And what did you learn from your trespassing? That you have a past you don't talk about, I said. That there was someone named Katya who mattered to you. That you're more than just the oligarch who bought me at an auction. He was quiet for a long moment, then gestured to the couch. Sit with me. I did, maintaining a careful distance between us. Katya was my wife, he said, his voice steady but something painful underneath. We married young. She died 15 years ago. Cancer, ovarian. By the time they caught it, it had metastasized everywhere. She was gone within 6 months. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. So am I, he said. I loved her. She was everything. Brilliant, kind, funny. She made me better than I was. And when she died, I lost the part of myself that knew how to connect with people, how to be vulnerable, how to love. Is that why you've never had anyone else here? I asked. No other women? Partially, he said. I've had relationships since Katya, mostly transactional. Women interested in my money or my connections, nothing real, nothing that felt like it mattered. And then you saw me at an auction, I finished. Then I saw you, he agreed, and something about you reminded me of her. Not physically, you look nothing alike, but something in your eyes, intelligence, strength, that quality of having survived something terrible but not being destroyed by it. I was destroyed, I said. I am destroyed. You're still here, he said. Still fighting, even if you don't realize that's what you're doing. Still present. Still yourself underneath everything that's happened. That's not destroyed. That's surviving. I didn't know what to say. This was the most honest conversation we'd had, the most vulnerable he'd been. It didn't change what he'd done, buying me, owning me, but it added context, layers, complexity. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you asked, he said. Because you deserve to know who I am if I expect you to share yourself with me. Because, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, because I want this to be more than captor and captive. I want us to actually know each other, to be honest with each other, as much as the circumstances allow. The circumstances being that you own me. Yes, he acknowledged. The circumstances being that I can't change that, Meredith. It is what it is. But within that reality, we can still choose how we relate to each other. We can be enemies, or we can be something else. What else is there? I asked. Companions, partners of a sort, people who share space and time and possibly more if we both want that. He turned to face me more directly. I know you're not ready. I know you're not ready. I know you may never be ready, but I'm patient. And I'm hoping that as you heal, as you adjust, you'll find that I'm not actually terrible, that life here isn't actually terrible, that maybe, possibly, you could find some measure of, if not happiness, at least contentment. You're asking a lot, I said. I'm offering a lot in return, he countered. Safety, comfort, honesty, respect, within the limits of our situation. No violence, no cruelty, just existence together. I looked at him, really looked at him, saw the lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled sometimes away from me, saw the gray at his temples that made him look distinguished rather than old, saw the intelligence and the loneliness and the hope that he was trying to hide but couldn't quite manage. He was a complicated man, a man who'd bought me at an auction but also given me a photograph of my dead husband, who'd punished me for breaking rules but made the punishment measured and fair, who kept me prisoner but treated me like a person. I didn't love him, didn't know if I could ever love him, but I was starting to understand him. And understanding was dangerous because it made it harder to hate him. I can't promise anything, I said finally. I can't promise I'll ever want what you want, that I'll ever be willing in the way you hope. I'm not asking for promises, he said. I'm just asking for possibility, for openness, for you to give this, to give us, a genuine chance. I thought about my alternatives, thought about what life would have been like if someone else had bought me. If Alexander Volkov, with his reputation for cruelty, had paid more. If I'd ended up with one of the other men at that auction, men who wouldn't have given me space or time or kindness. I thought about being alone in whatever cell or situation I'd have been in, with no books or windows or good food, with violence and degradation instead of patience and strange, confusing respect. This wasn't a good situation, but it could have been so much worse. Okay, I heard myself say, I'll try. I can't promise more than that, but I'll try. Something in his expression shifted. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. That's all I ask. He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted to. When I didn't, his hand covered mine. His skin was warm, his grip gentle. Thank you, he said quietly. We sat like that for a while, hands touching, silence stretching between us, but somehow not uncomfortable. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering Moscow in white. And inside, in this strange penthouse prison, something shifted between us. Some barrier cracked, just slightly. Not broken, but no longer quite as solid. I didn't know what would come next. Didn't know if I'd made the right choice by agreeing to try, but I knew I couldn't keep fighting forever. Couldn't keep living in constant resistance when there was nothing to resist toward, nowhere to escape to. Maybe Sergei was right. Maybe the only way forward was to accept what was and try to make it bearable. Maybe someday it could even be more than bearable. I wasn't ready to think about that yet. But as his thumb stroked across my knuckles, as I sat beside the man who owned me and felt something other than fear or hatred, I realized that ready might not be relevant. This was my life now, and I had to find a way to live it. The weeks that followed our conversation were different. Not dramatically so, but subtly. The dinners continued, but we talked more openly. About his work, yes, but also about his childhood growing up in Soviet-era Russia, about his parents who taught him to navigate a system designed to crush anyone without connections. About Katya, sometimes, when he felt like sharing. About his guilt over her death, his feeling that he should have caught the cancer sooner, should have forced her to see doctors earlier. Guilt is useless, he said one night. It changes nothing, but I carry it anyway. I understand that, I said. I feel guilty for surviving when Slava didn't, for staying in Ukraine when everyone warned me to leave. For all of it. Survivor's guilt, he said. Very common, also very useless. You didn't kill your husband, Russian soldiers did. You didn't start the war, Putin did. You're just someone who got caught in the machinery of violence. So, are you responsible for buying me? I asked. Or was that just machinery too? He smiled slightly. That's a fair question. Yes, I'm responsible. I made a choice. I could have walked away from that auction, could have let someone else buy you, but I didn't. So, yes, I own that decision and its implications. Do you regret it? I asked. No, he said without hesitation. Do you wish someone else had bought you? I thought about it honestly. No, I admitted. If this had to happen, I'm glad it was you. Something in his eyes warmed. Progress, he said. Progress. That's what this was, apparently. Slow, confusing progress towards something neither of us could quite define. He started inviting me to his office sometimes in the evenings, not for anything untoward, just to share space while he worked. I'd bring a book and read while he typed emails or reviewed documents. Sometimes he'd explain something about his business, translate a particularly interesting article from a Russian newspaper, share some piece of his world. Why are you showing me all this? I asked one evening. Aren't you worried I'll learn something valuable, something I could use against you if I ever got out? You won't get out, he said matter of factly. So that concern is irrelevant. And I show you because I want you to understand my life. What I do, how I think, why certain things matter. I want you to see me as a whole person, not just as your captor. You are my captor, I pointed out. Yes, he agreed, but I'm also other things. Just as you're more than just my captive, you're intelligent, educated, opinionated. I enjoy those qualities. I want to engage with them. It was manipulation, I knew. Sophisticated, intelligent manipulation designed to make me more compliant, more willing. But knowing that didn't make it less effective. Because he was right, he was more than just my captor. And I was starting to see those other parts of him. 2 months into my captivity, something shifted physically between us. We were in the living room after dinner, both reading. I'd showered earlier and was wearing comfortable clothes, soft pants, and a loose sweater. My hair was down, damp at the ends, probably a mess. I felt his eyes on me and looked up. He was watching me with an expression I'd seen occasionally, but that he usually hid quickly. Desire, want, need. What? I asked. You're beautiful, he said simply. I know you don't feel beautiful. I know you still see yourself as broken. But sitting there like that, comfortable in my home, your guard down, you're beautiful. I didn't know what to say. Compliments felt dangerous, felt like preludes to demands I wasn't ready for. I'm not asking for anything, he said, reading my tension. I'm just telling you what I see, what I've been seeing for weeks now. I'm not ready, I said quietly. I know, he said, but you're getting closer. I can see it. The way you look at me sometimes, the way you don't flinch when I touch you anymore, the way you sought me out this evening instead of staying in your room. You're adjusting, healing, opening. He was right, and I hated that he was right. I had been seeking him out more, had found that the evenings we spent together were less uncomfortable than the time alone in my room, had started to anticipate our dinners, our conversations, the way he looked at me like I mattered. Stockholm Syndrome, probably, or just pragmatic adaptation to an inescapable situation. What happens when I'm ready? I asked. What do you expect from me? I expect you to come to me, he said. Not because you have to, not because you're afraid of consequences, but because you want to. Because you've decided that intimacy with me is something you can accept, maybe even desire. And if I never decide that, then we continue as we are, he said. I told you, Meredith, I'm patient. I can wait. I'd rather wait forever for genuine willingness than take something given under duress. Why? I asked, frustrated. Why does that matter so much to you? You could just force yourself on me. You have the power. Why wait? He set his book aside and stood, came over to where I sat on the couch, knelt in front of me, his eyes level with mine. Because I've had enough empty things in my life, he said. Enough transactions, enough meaningless encounters with women who wanted my money or my connections or just something to make themselves feel alive. I want something real, something that feels like genuine connection, even if the circumstances are impossible. And that requires your choice, your genuine participation. Otherwise, it's just rape dressed up as relationship. The honesty was startling, disarming. I don't know if I can ever truly choose this, I admitted. How can any choice be real when I'm your prisoner? That's the paradox, he acknowledged, and I don't have a good answer. But I'm hoping that as time passes, as you heal, as we build something here together, your choice will become more real, more yours. Less about the circumstances and more about the actual connection between us. He reached up slowly and tucked a strand of damp hair behind my ear, the gesture tender. I'm not a good man, Meredith. I've done terrible things to build my business, to maintain my position. I bought you at an auction. I'm keeping you here against your will. I'm not pretending to be a hero in this story. Then what are you? I whispered. Honest, he said. I'm honest about what I am, what I want, what this is, and I'm offering you the best version of this situation that I can create. That's all. That's enough for me. I hope eventually it will be enough for you too. He stood, returned to his chair, picked up his book, as if that intense moment hadn't just happened, as if he hadn't just knelt before me and laid himself bare. I sat there, heart racing, mind spinning, and realized with a combination of horror and something else, something I didn't want to name, that he was winning. Slowly, patiently, inexorably, he was winning. I was starting to see him as a person, starting to care what he thought, starting to want his approval, his attention, his touch. Stockholm Syndrome had to be. Nothing else made sense, but knowing the name for it didn't make it less real, didn't make the warmth in my chest less present when he looked at me with those gray eyes, didn't make the loneliness less acute when he traveled for business and I missed his presence. I was being broken. Gently, kindly, but definitely broken. And the most terrifying part was that I wasn't sure I wanted to fight it anymore. 3 months into my captivity, I made my choice. It was late evening. We'd had dinner, had spent time in the living room, the usual routine. Sergey had gone to his bedroom, the one room I'd never entered, the final boundary. I stood in the hallway outside his door for a long time, my heart hammering, knowing what it meant if I knocked, knowing what I was offering, knowing that once I crossed this threshold, everything would change. Part of me screamed to turn around, to go back to my room, to preserve that last piece of resistance, to not give him what he'd been patiently waiting for. But another part, a larger part, was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of being alone, tired of pretending I didn't feel something for this complicated, manipulative, surprisingly gentle man who owned me. I knocked. "Come in," his voice called. I opened the door. His bedroom was darker than the rest of the penthouse, masculine and simple. A large bed, dark furniture, windows showing Moscow at night, and Sergey standing by the window in a t-shirt and sleep pants, looking at me with an expression that held surprise and hope and desire. "Meredith," he said quietly, "you don't have to." "I know," I interrupted. "You've said that many times, that I don't have to, that you'll wait, that you want genuine willingness." I stepped further into the room, closed the door behind me. "So I'm choosing. I'm here because I want to be, because I'm tired of being alone, because I swallowed hard, because I want this, want you, or at least I want to try." He crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands cupping my face, his eyes searching mine. "Are you sure? Really sure? Because once we do this, we can't undo it." "I'm sure," I said, and meant it. He kissed me then, and it was nothing like I expected. Not aggressive or demanding. Gentle, questioning, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to change my mind. I didn't pull away. His lips were warm, his touch careful. He kissed me like I was something precious, something valuable, something that mattered. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, and I let him. Let myself lean into his warmth, into his strength, into this terrible, impossible connection we'd built. "Tell me if you want to stop," he murmured against my lips. "Anytime, for any reason, just tell me and we stop. Understood?" "Understood," I whispered. He led me to the bed and we lay down together, and he proceeded to show me that patience and care and genuine attention could exist even in the most impossible circumstances. That touch could be tender even when it came from someone who owned you. That pleasure could be real even when it was complicated by power and captivity and trauma. Afterward, I lay in his arms, his heartbeat steady against my ear, and tried to understand what I'd just done, who I'd just become. "Regrets?" he asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Too soon to tell." "Fair enough," he said. "For what it's worth, thank you for trusting me with this, for choosing me, even though your choices are limited." "I didn't do it for you," I said. "I did it for me, because I needed not to be alone anymore, because I needed to feel something other than fear and grief." "I know," he said. "That's what makes it real." We lay there in silence as Moscow glittered outside his windows, and I knew that something fundamental had shifted, that I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. I belonged to Sergei Petrushev in ways I hadn't before. Not just legally, not just physically, but emotionally, psychologically, completely. And the terrifying part, the part I couldn't quite face yet, was that I wasn't sure I minded anymore. Chapter 3. The morning after I first went to Sergei's bedroom, I woke up disoriented, momentarily forgetting where I was. Then I felt the weight of his arm across my waist, the warmth of his body pressed against my back, and everything came rushing back. What I'd done, what I'd chosen, what I'd become. I lay there in the gray morning light filtering through his windows, watching Moscow wake up below us, and tried to reconcile the woman I was now with, the woman I'd been. Meredith Harris, the dietitian from Oregon, who'd thought her biggest problems were finding a decent man and affording rent. Meredith Voronin, the newlywed who'd believed love could conquer everything, even geopolitical conflict. And now this Meredith, nameless, stateless, belonging to a Russian oligarch who'd bought her at an auction. Sergei stirred behind me, his lips finding the curve of my neck. "Good morning," he murmured against my skin, his voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning," I whispered back and hated how natural it felt. How right. He pulled me closer, and I let him because what else was there to do? I'd made my choice, knocked on his door, crossed that final threshold. There was no going back now, no pretending I was still the victim who'd been taken against her will. I was complicit now. A willing participant in whatever this was. "Regrets?" he asked, echoing his question from the night before. I thought about lying, thought about telling him what he wanted to hear. But something in me, some stubborn remnant of the person I used to be, refused. "I don't know yet. Ask me again in a month." He laughed softly. "Fair enough. Breakfast, please." We got up, and I was acutely aware of my nakedness as I moved around his bedroom looking for my clothes from the night before. He watched me with undisguised appreciation, making no effort to hide his interest. When I found my sweater and pants, he crossed the room and stilled my hands. "Leave them. Wear this instead." He handed me one of his shirts, expensive, crisp white cotton that smelled like him. I put it on, and it hung to mid-thigh, the sleeves past my fingertips. He smiled with satisfaction. Better. It was a claiming, a marking, making me wear his clothes, his scent, his ownership visible for anyone who might see. I should have hated it, should have insisted on my own clothes, my own identity. Instead, I pulled the collar up to my nose and breathed in the smell of expensive cologne and something uniquely him. We ate breakfast together in his kitchen, a space I'd rarely used, preferring to let Polina handle the cooking. She made eggs and toast, moving with surprising competence around the appliances. We sat at the small kitchen table rather than the formal dining room, and it felt oddly domestic, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with sex. "What happens now?" I asked, pushing eggs around my plate. "Now we continue. You move into my room if you're comfortable with that, or you keep yours and we see each other when it feels right, whatever you prefer." "What do you prefer?" "I prefer you in my bed, in my space. But I won't force it. You've given me more than I had any right to expect. I can be patient about the rest." I studied him over my coffee cup, this complicated man who'd bought me but gave me choices within my captivity, who wanted me willing but had all the power to force, who was my owner but treated me like a partner. "I'll move my things into your room," I heard myself say, "but I need my own space sometimes, a place to think, to be alone when everything gets too overwhelming." "Keep your old room for that. Think of it as an office, a sanctuary, somewhere that's entirely yours." He reached across the table and took my hand. "I want you to be comfortable here, Meredith. I want you to feel like this is home, not just prison." "It'll always be prison in some ways, you know that, right? No matter how gilded the cage, it's still a cage." "I know, but maybe we can make it a cage you don't entirely hate living in? Maybe." That word carried so much weight. Maybe I could adjust. Maybe I could find some measure of contentment. Maybe I could even be happy in the twisted, impossible way that happiness could exist in circumstances like these. The first week after I moved into Sergei's bedroom passed in a blur of new routines and adjusted boundaries. He was surprisingly considerate about my need for space, never demanding more than I was willing to give. The sex was frequent but not constant, intense but not violent. He seemed determined to prove he could be gentle, that he valued my pleasure as much as his own. But gradually, as I became more comfortable, as my body healed from the trauma of captivity and my mind adapted to this new reality, things began to shift. The gentleness gave way to something rawer, more primal. He'd grab my wrists and pin them above my head, his gray eyes dark with desire as he took what he wanted. He'd wrap my hair around his fist and pull, just hard enough to make me gasp. He'd mark my skin with his teeth and hands, leaving bruises I'd find later like breadcrumbs trailing back to the night before. I should have been afraid, should have seen these escalations as warning signs, but I wasn't afraid, because even in his roughness there was care. Even in his dominance there was attention to my responses, my needs, my boundaries. He pushed me, yes, tested my limits, but he never crossed the line into cruelty. "You like this," he said one night, his hand wrapped around my throat, not squeezing, just holding, just reminding me who was in control. "Don't you?" I couldn't deny it. My body betrayed me, arching into his touch, seeking more even as my mind recoiled from what that meant about who I was becoming. "Yes, say it properly. Tell me what you like." "I like when you—" I struggled with the words, with admitting this truth about myself. "I like when you're rough with me, when you take control, when I don't have to think or choose or be responsible for anything. Because it's easier. Because someone else making the decisions means you can let go of the guilt about wanting this." He was right, and I hated that he was right. Hated how well he understood the psychology of what was happening to me, the way captivity and trauma and loneliness had broken down my resistance and rebuilt it into something else entirely, something that craved his dominance because it meant I didn't have to carry the weight of my own choices. "I'm not going to judge you for this," he continued, his voice low and rough against my ear, "for wanting to submit, for needing someone else to be in control. There's no shame in it, Meredith. It's just who you are, who you're becoming, who I was becoming, not who I'd been, but who this situation was shaping me into. A woman who found safety in submission, who craved the certainty of someone else's will imposed on hers, who could lose herself in the physicality of being owned because it meant she didn't have to think about everything she'd lost. 2 months into our physical relationship, Sergey started taking me out into his world. The first time, I was terrified. Polina helped me dress in designer clothes I'd never have been able to afford in my old life. A sleek black dress that hugged every curve, expensive heels that made my legs look impossibly long, jewelry that cost more than I could afford on a year's salary at Creekside. My hair was professionally styled, my makeup flawless. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. "You're beautiful," Sergey said from the doorway, and something in his voice made it sound like truth rather than flattery. "I look like someone else, someone who belongs in your world. You do belong in my world. You're mine. That makes you part of everything I am." The restaurant he took me to was the kind of place I'd only seen in movies. All dark wood and soft lighting, and waiters who moved like dancers. The other diners were clearly wealthy, clearly powerful. I recognized a few faces from Russian news programs I tried to watch, politicians and businessmen whose names I couldn't quite remember. We were seated immediately despite the crowd of people waiting. The maitre d' practically bowed to Sergey, his deference so complete it was almost comical. "Mr. Petruchev, your usual table, and may I say, it's a pleasure to see you with such lovely company." Throughout dinner, I watched how people treated him. The constant interruptions from other diners stopping by our table to shake his hand, to curry favor, to introduce themselves and their wives and daughters. The way the restaurant staff anticipated his every need before he could voice it. The envelope of cash that appeared discreetly with our check returned unopened because apparently Sergey's money wasn't good here. His presence was payment enough. "You're like royalty," I said as we left, his hand possessive on the small of my back. "Not royalty, just someone with enough money and power that people want to stay on my good side. It's transactional, always transactional." "Is that what we are? A transaction?" He stopped walking and turned to face me on the Moscow street, expensive cars passing by, the city alive around us. "No. Whatever else this is, whatever complicated, fucked up thing we're building, it's not a transaction. I bought you, yes, but what we've become to each other, that's something else entirely." I wanted to believe him, wanted to think that this connection between us transcended the horror of how it started, but I couldn't quite convince myself. Not yet. The shopping trips were even more surreal. He'd arrange for entire floors of luxury boutiques to be closed to other customers, giving us privacy to browse. Hermes, Louis Vuitton, Chanel, brands I'd only dreamed of owning back in Oregon were suddenly mine for the taking. He'd sit in a leather chair like a king on a throne while I modeled clothes, his eyes tracking every movement, occasionally shaking his head or nodding his approval. That one, he'd say, and the dress or shoes or handbag would be added to our purchases. Money seemed completely meaningless to him. He'd spend $50,000 without blinking, as casual as I used to be buying coffee at the Roaster's Nook. This is too much, I protested after one particularly extravagant shopping trip. I don't need all of this. No, you don't need it. But I want you to have it. I want you to look the part when you're with me. I want everyone who sees us to know you belong to someone powerful, someone who values you enough to dress you in the finest things money can buy. I'm a status symbol, a trophy, among other things. But isn't that better than being invisible, than being nobody? You were invisible in your old life, Meredith. Working a job that didn't appreciate you, dating men who didn't value you, living in an apartment that smelled like curry. Now you're visible, now you matter. Not because of who you are, but because of who I am. Is that really worse? I didn't have an answer, because part of me, a part I was deeply ashamed of, agreed with him. This life was better in so many material ways, better than the loneliness and stagnation of my Oregon existence, better than the brief, doomed marriage in Ukraine, better than the horror of Russian captivity. At least here I was comfortable. At least here I was wanted. The sex continued to evolve, growing rougher and more intense as Sergei's true nature revealed itself. He was a natural dominant, not in the sense of BDSM lifestyle choices, but in the fundamental way he approached the world. He expected obedience, expected submission, expected me to bend to his will in all things. And I found, to my horror and fascination, that I could give him that. That something in me responded to his dominance with a submissiveness I'd never known I possessed. When he commanded, I obeyed. When he pushed, I yielded. When he took, I surrendered. On your knees, he'd say, and I'd kneel without question. Come here, and I'd cross the room to him. Tell me you're mine, and I'd whisper the words that were both prison and promise. I'm yours, always yours. We'd fallen into patterns that felt simultaneously liberating and terrifying. He controlled what I wore, what I ate, how I spent my days, not cruelly or arbitrarily, but with the calm certainty of someone who knew his preferences would be followed. And I followed them because the alternative, constant resistance, constant conflict, was exhausting in ways I couldn't sustain. You so good for me, he'd murmur afterward, his hands gentle now, soothing where they'd been rough moments before. So perfectly submissive, so willing to give me what I need. Is this who I am now? Just yours? Yes. But that's not diminishment, Meredith. Being mine means being protected, valued, cared for. It means never having to worry about basic needs or safety. It means having someone who will always put your welfare first, even when that means being hard with you, demanding things you're not sure you can give. It means not being equal, not being a partner in any real sense. We're partners in the ways that matter. But yes, the power dynamic is unequal. It always will be. I'm older, wealthier, more experienced in the world. I have connections and resources you can't imagine. Trying to pretend we're equals would be a lie. Better to acknowledge reality and build something sustainable within it. So I'm just supposed to accept being subordinate? Your possession? I inquired. My partner and my possession. Both. Simultaneously. Because you can be both, Meredith. You can submit to me sexually and domestically while still maintaining your own identity, your own thoughts, your own inner life. Submission doesn't mean erasure. But it felt like erasure sometimes, felt like I was disappearing into him, into his wants and needs and demands. The woman I'd been, Meredith Harris, with her dreams and ambitions and independence, was fading, being replaced by someone new. Someone who found purpose in pleasing Sergei Petrushev, in being what he needed, in submitting to his will. I fell in love with him during those 2 months. Or maybe I fell in love with the life he offered. Or maybe I just adapted so completely to captivity that my brain rewired itself to find pleasure in what I couldn't escape. Stockholm Syndrome on steroids, a complete psychological transformation that made me dependent on my captor for every aspect of my existence. The realization hit me one evening as we sat together in his office. He was working on something complicated involving European sanctions and offshore accounts, explaining the details with the expectation that I'd understand and engage. And I did understand. I'd learned to follow his world, to care about things that mattered to him, to make his concerns my own. I love you, I said suddenly, interrupting his explanation of shell corporations and tax havens. He stopped talking and looked at me, his gray eyes unreadable. Say that again. I love you. I don't know when it happened, or how it happened, or if it's even real love, or just trauma bonding and adaptation, but I love you. I love this life we've built. I love who I am with you, even though I sometimes hate who I am with you. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. He pulled me from my chair onto his lap, his arms wrapping around me in a hold that was both possessive and protective. I love you too, Meredith. Have for a while now. Was just waiting for you to catch up. How can you love me? You bought me. You own me. How is that love? Because love isn't always pretty or conventional or moral. Sometimes it's fucked up and complicated and born from circumstances that should never produce anything good. But it's still love. It's still real. What I feel for you is real, whatever else it might be. We made love that night in his office chair, urgent and desperate and overwhelming. Afterward, still tangled together, still breathing hard, he pressed his lips to my temple and murmured in Russian, Moya Lubov, Moya Zhuzin, my love, my life. I understood enough Russian now to catch the meaning, enough to know he meant it. But even as I basked in this declaration, this transformation from captive to lover, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered warnings, reminded me that love built on such a foundation was inherently unstable, that submission born from captivity wasn't sustainable long term, that someday, somehow, this carefully constructed reality would have to confront the truth of how it began. I ignored that voice, buried it beneath the pleasure of being wanted, being loved, being Sergei's in every way that mattered, because the alternative, acknowledging the fundamental wrongness of what we'd become, was unbearable. So I surrendered completely. Let myself love this man who'd bought me. Let myself find joy in submission. Let myself believe that this twisted, impossible relationship could be enough. Despite the intimacy we'd built, despite the love we'd declared, there were still walls between Sergei and me. Territories of his past he wouldn't let me enter, questions he deflected with skill and practice. The man I'd fallen in love with was still fundamentally unknowable in crucial ways. It started to eat at me, the not knowing, the sense that he held all the cards while I'd laid myself completely bare. You say you love me, I told him one night as we lay in bed, the Moscow night glittering beyond his windows. But you never really share yourself with me. You know everything about me, my past, my family, my fears, my dreams, but I know almost nothing about you beyond the surface. What do you want to know? Everything. Where you really came from, how you built this empire, what you had to do to get here, the parts you don't talk about because they're ugly or complicated or make you look less than perfect. He was quiet for a long time, his fingers tracing idle patterns on my bare shoulder. Why does it matter? Why not just accept what we have without digging into foundations that might not be stable? Because how can we build a life on secrets? How can I truly know you if you won't let me see the parts you're ashamed of? Who says I'm ashamed? You are. I can see it sometimes when something triggers a memory or when you think I'm not paying attention. There's guilt there, shame, things you've done or seen or been part of that haunt you. He sighed and pulled me closer, my head resting on his chest where I could hear his heartbeat, steady, strong, reassuring even as he prepared to tell me things that might make me see him differently. If I tell you, really tell you, everything might change. You might not be able to look at me the same way. Might not be able to love me once you know what I've done, what I've been part of. I can't love someone I don't really know. Right now, I love the version of you that you've shown me. But that's not all of you. If we're going to build something real, something lasting, I need the truth. All of it. You're sure? Because once I tell you, I can't untell you. The knowledge will be yours to carry, and it's not light. I'm sure. He kissed the top of my head, a gesture so tender it almost hurt. All right, but let's do this properly. Get dressed. This conversation requires tea and distance, not pillow talk.
We moved to the living room, both of us dressed in comfortable clothes, 2 cups of tea growing cold on the table between us as I tried to figure out where to start. How to tell this woman I'd bought and somehow come to love about the depths of depravity I'd witnessed and participated in. She sat across from me, patient and waiting, her brown eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made me want to both confess everything and run from the room. But I'd promised her truth, and if nothing else, I kept my promises. I wasn't always this, I began, gesturing to the penthouse around us, to the life I'd built. I came from nothing, less than nothing, really. I was born in Siberia, in a town you've never heard of, and I'd rather forget. My father worked in a factory. My mother cleaned houses for people slightly less poor than we were. We lived in a 2-room apartment that was freezing in winter and somehow still freezing in summer, shared a bathroom with 3 other families. Ate potatoes and black bread most days because that's what we could afford. I watched Meredith's face, looking for judgment or pity, but found only attention. She was listening, really listening, trying to understand where I'd come from. When I was 17, my parents made a decision. They'd been in contact with my father's brother, my uncle Mikhail, who lived in Moscow. Mikhail had done well for himself, very well, and he'd offered to take me in, to give me opportunities they never could. So they put me on a train with everything I owned in a single duffel bag and sent me away from the only life I'd ever known. I paused to drink cold tea, remembering that train ride, the terror and excitement of leaving Siberia for Moscow, the naive belief that my uncle's generosity was purely altruistic. Mikhail Patrushev was not a good man, but he was a successful man, which in Russia often matters more. This was the early 90s, just after the Soviet Union collapsed. Everything was chaos. The old rules didn't apply anymore, but new rules hadn't been established. It was like playing poker when nobody could agree on what cards were worth. So the people who were ruthless enough, connected enough, shameless enough to grab everything they could, they became the new elite. The oligarchs, Meredith said softly. Yes, the first generation of Russian oligarchs. Men who saw opportunity in collapse and seized it with both hands. My uncle was one of them. He'd started as a mid-level member of the Russian Mafia, the Bratva, back in the 80s, not high enough to be truly powerful, but high enough to make useful connections. When the Soviet government started to fail, when it became clear privatization was coming, Mikhail leveraged those connections for everything they were worth. I could see it all so clearly, even now. My uncle's apartment in Moscow, not this penthouse, but still unimaginably luxurious compared to what I'd left behind. The constant stream of visitors, all of them dangerous men with hard eyes and expensive clothes. The casual way they discussed violence and corruption like normal people discuss the weather. The Russian government at that time was spectacularly corrupt. The privatization program that was supposed to give ownership of state assets to regular citizens was hijacked by men like my uncle. They had inside information about which assets were valuable. They had the capital, usually gained illegally, to buy up vouchers from citizens who didn't understand what they were selling. They had government contacts who made sure auctions went their way. In the space of a few years, billion-dollar assets changed hands for pennies. Your uncle got rich, Meredith said. Obscenely rich. He'd focused on oil and natural gas assets, bought up several extraction operations in Siberia, a refinery outside Moscow, pipeline infrastructure, paid maybe $2 million American for assets actually worth billions. And he wasn't alone. There were maybe 15 or 20 men who pulled off similar heists. They became the oligarchs you hear about today, the billionaires who run Russia from the shadows. I stood up, too restless to sit still through this story, walked to the windows and looked out at Moscow, the city my uncle had helped me conquer, the city I'd claimed as my own through methods I was about to confess. My uncle took me under his wing. For 7 years he taught me everything he knew: how to read people, how to identify opportunities, how to navigate Russian politics and bureaucracy, how to use violence when necessary and restraint when more useful. He was grooming me to eventually take over parts of his operation, to be a lieutenant in his empire. That's when he introduced you to the Mafia, Meredith said quietly. I turned to look at her. She was still sitting on the couch, hands wrapped around her cold teacup, her face pale but determined. Yes, When I was 21, there was a ceremony, an initiation. I was formally brought into the Bratva, made a full member with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. Do you know what that means? She shook her head. It means I took oaths, blood oaths. It means I agreed to follow the code, the Vorovskoy Zakon, the thieves' code. It means I marked myself permanently as part of that world, that brotherhood, and it means I participated in things that brotherhood required. The memories came flooding back. The ceremony in a warehouse outside Moscow, the older members surrounding me, testing my commitment, making sure I understood what I was agreeing to. The tattoos that marked me as one of them, I'd had them removed later, mostly, but traces remained if you knew where to look. The first assignment that followed, proof of my loyalty, proof I was willing to do what was necessary. I won't describe everything I did during those years. Some of it you can imagine, some of it I hope you never have to imagine. But I was a good soldier, a good earner. I made my uncle proud, made the organization money, proved I was more than just Mikhail's nephew trading on his name. I returned to the couch, sitting beside Meredith now instead of across from her. Needed her closer for what came next. About 4 years into my membership, my uncle introduced me to another aspect of the organization's operations, something they kept more secret than their usual activities, something that required absolute discretion and absolute loyalty. The human trafficking, Meredith whispered. Yes, but it wasn't random trafficking. Wasn't grabbing girls off streets or smuggling refugees to sell to brothels. This was something more sophisticated, more organized, more explicitly designed for the wealthy and powerful. I took her hand, partly for my own comfort and partly to keep her anchored as I explained. After the oligarchs got rich, after they'd bought their yachts and mansions and football clubs, some of them got bored. Money alone wasn't exciting anymore. They'd bought everything they could buy legally. So they started looking for things they couldn't buy legally, things that would scratch that itch for power, for control, for having what others couldn't have. Women, Meredith said, her voice hollow. Women, girls. Specifically, women and girls from other countries who could disappear without too much international attention. The organization, and by then it had grown beyond just the Bratva, included oligarchs and politicians and even some FSB members. They created an elaborate system. They identified vulnerable women in Eastern Europe, the Balkans, Central Asia, women escaping war zones or poverty or abusive situations, women who were already dislocated, already missing from any official record. I watched Meredith's face as I explained the mechanics of the horror I'd been part of. Watched her struggle to reconcile the man she'd fallen in love with against this description of systematic evil. They'd bring these women to Russia under various pretenses. Some thought they were coming for legitimate jobs. Some were actively kidnapped during conflicts. When there's war, people disappear and nobody asks too many questions. Some were sold by family members who needed money. The methods varied, but the result was the same. These women ended up in the organization's custody, processed through a system designed to break them down and remake them into property. Like what happened to me. Yes, exactly like what happened to you. The auction where I bought you, that wasn't unusual. Those auctions happen regularly, maybe once every 2 or 3 months. Different venues, different cities, but always the same basic setup. Wealthy men gathering to bid on women who have nowhere to go and no one to save them. I paused, making sure she was still with me, still able to hear this. She squeezed my hand, telling me to continue. The rules were very specific, very clear. When you bought a woman at one of these auctions, you didn't own her forever. You got a 7-year lease. 7 years to do whatever you wanted. Keep her as a mistress, a servant, a plaything, whatever. But at the end of 7 years, you had 2 choices. You could return her to the organization's pool, let her be auctioned again or disposed of however they saw fit. Or you could eliminate her yourself. Meredith gasped. Eliminate meaning, kill her. Yes, those were the only 2 options. You couldn't release her, couldn't send her home, couldn't let her go back to whatever life she'd had before, because releasing her meant she could talk, could report what had happened to her, could expose the organization to authorities, international attention, consequences. That's insane, that's evil, she interjected. Yes, but it was also how the system maintained itself, how it protected its members. Nobody talked because the women who knew couldn't be allowed to live free. And the men who participated knew that if they broke the rules, they'd face consequences worse than anything they could do to their property. I stood again, needing movement, needing to keep my hands busy so I wouldn't have to see Meredith's reaction as clearly. About 6 months after I was introduced to this operation, there was an incident, an object lesson in why the rules couldn't be broken. The son of an oligarch born into wealth and privilege, thinking that made him exempt from consequences, younger than me by a few years, arrogant and impulsive in the way rich kids often are. His name was Andrei. His father was one of the founding oligarchs, controlled huge aluminum assets, was worth maybe $15 billion. Andrei had everything: money, looks, education, opportunities. But he was weak, sentimental, stupid in ways that rich people can be stupid because they've never faced real consequences. What did he do? Meredith asked. He bought a girl at one of the auctions, a French woman named Celeste. She'd been taken during a vacation in Croatia. Wrong place, wrong time, fit the profile. Beautiful, educated, from a good family. The kind of woman who'd fetch a high price. Andrei paid $250,000 for her. Said he was in love within the first week. The parallels weren't lost on me. Andrei falling for Celeste mirrored my own situation with Meredith. The differences were in how we'd responded to that feeling. 3 months after the auction, Andrei decided he couldn't keep Celeste prisoner, couldn't live with himself if he continued to hold her against her will. So he did the one thing the organization absolutely forbade. He released her, gave her money and documents, and sent her back to France, made her promise not to tell anyone what had happened. But she told, Meredith said. Of course she told. Within days of getting home, she went to French authorities, told them everything: the kidnapping, the auction, the organization, names she'd overheard. It created an international incident. French government demanded investigations. Russian government had to at least pretend to care. The organization came under scrutiny from everyone: Interpol, FSB, international human rights groups. Everything they built was threatened because one weak, sentimental boy couldn't follow the rules. I sat back down, needing to see Meredith's face for this part. The organization's response was swift and brutal. They suspended all auctions for 8 months while the heat died down. They disappeared anyone who might have been a weak link. And they made an example of Andrei. They killed him. They made it look like suicide. His body was found at his penthouse apartment. Gunshot to the head, suicide note about depression and business failures. Very convincing. His oligarch father knew the truth, but couldn't do anything about it without admitting his own involvement in the organization. So he buried his son and kept his mouth shut, and probably lay awake at night thinking about the price of breaking the code. I watched Meredith process this information, watched her understand the implications for both of us. I saw it all, was at the meeting where they decided Andrew's fate, watched as men I respected discussed his execution with the same tone they used to discuss a business merger. Learned that night that money and power and family connections meant nothing if you threatened the organization, that the rules were absolute, that there was no forgiveness for weakness. That's why you couldn't release me, Meredith said quietly, even if you'd wanted to. Yes, from the moment I bought you, your fate was sealed. I could keep you for 7 years. Could marry you if I wanted, since that didn't technically break the rules. Katja, my late wife, had been bought at an auction too. Marriage was a loophole, a way to extend the lease indefinitely without officially releasing her. But I could never let you go, could never send you home, because doing so would mean signing my own death warrant. So when you bought me, I knew I was committing to keeping you forever. Yes, either as property for 7 years followed by execution, or return to the pool, or as something more permanent. There was no middle ground, no path that ended with you free and me alive. The silence stretched between us. I'd laid it all out: the horror of the organization, the rules that bound us both, the reality that my buying her had saved her from worse fates but had also trapped her irrevocably. Katja, Meredith finally said, your wife, what happened to her? I married her about 8 months after I bought her at an auction. Fell in love with her, same as I fell in love with you. The organization allowed it because marriage didn't break the rules. I was still keeping her, still ensuring she couldn't talk. We had 14 years together, good years mostly. She adapted to the life, found ways to be happy within the constraints, and then she got sick. The memories of Katya's illness still hurt, even after all these years. Ovarian cancer. By the time they caught it, it had spread everywhere. She was gone in 6 months. And the worst part, the absolutely worst part, was that I couldn't help but feel relieved. Relieved? Because she died of natural causes. Because I didn't have to make the choice the organization required. If she'd lived, eventually I'd have faced an impossible decision. Keep her until we both died naturally, or end her life when I no longer wanted to keep her. Cancer took that choice away from me, made me a widower instead of a killer. I mourned her genuinely, but I also felt this terrible, shameful relief that I'd never have to decide how her story ended. Meredith stood and crossed to where I sat, kneeling in front of me so our eyes were level. That's why you want me to love you, why you need me willing. Because if I love you and submit to you and choose this life, then you never have to worry about me trying to leave. Never have to worry about making that choice. Yes, love ensures silence. Love ensures compliance. Love means you'll keep my secrets because they're your secrets too. It's manipulative and calculated, and I won't pretend otherwise. But it's also real. What I feel for you is real, even if the circumstances that created it are monstrous. She cupped my face in her hands, her touch gentle despite everything I just told her. I understand now. I understand why you couldn't let me go even if you wanted to, why you needed me to adapt and accept and eventually love you. Why submission isn't just about control, it's about survival, mine and yours. Does knowing all this change things? Change how you feel about me? She thought about it, really thought, and I loved her for that honesty. It should. It should make me hate you, make me see you as the monster you've described, but I think I already knew, deep down. I knew there had to be more to the story, darker reasons why you did what you did, and I chose to love you anyway, chose this life anyway. Maybe that makes me complicit, maybe it makes me just as bad as you, but here we are. You're not as bad as me. You're a victim who learned to survive. And you're a survivor who learned to victimize. We're both products of systems designed to break people. You just happened to end up on top of that system instead of underneath it. It was the most generous interpretation possible of what I told her, more generous than I deserved. But I'd take it. Take her understanding and forgiveness and love, even if I didn't deserve any of it. There's one more thing you should know, I said, about my position in the organization now. About why I have more freedom than others would. Tell me. After my uncle died, I inherited his position. I'm not just a member anymore, I'm a senior member. I sit on the council that makes decisions. And more importantly, I've made myself invaluable in ways that give me leverage. How? Money laundering. The organization has billions in assets that need to be cleaned, need to move through legitimate channels. My petrochemical company is perfect for that. We have international operations, complex supply chains, enough legitimate business to hide illicit money. I've built systems that wash the organization's money better than anyone else could. That makes me valuable, makes me someone they can't easily eliminate. So when you offered me freedom, she started and paused, wanting me to finish her statement. I meant it. I have enough leverage that releasing you wouldn't necessarily be a death sentence for me. They'd be angry, would make things difficult, but they need me too much to kill me outright. I just have to be very, very careful for the rest of my life. Always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if today's the day they decide I've outlived my usefulness. That's why you wanted me to choose. If I chose to leave, you'd let me. But if I chose to stay, it would be because I genuinely wanted this life with you. Yes. She stood and pulled me to my feet, wrapped her arms around me, held me with a fierceness that spoke of understanding and acceptance and love that existed despite, or maybe because of, the darkness I'd revealed. I choose you, she whispered against my chest. I choose this life. Not because I don't have options, but because this is where I want to be. With you. As your partner and your property and your wife, if you'll have me, as someone who knows your secrets and keeps them because they're ours now. I held her tighter, this impossible woman who'd survived everything and somehow still chose me. You're sure? You can't unknow what I've told you. Can't unhear the confessions I've made. I'm sure. We're both damaged, both survivors of systems that should have destroyed us. Maybe that's why this works. Maybe only someone as broken as me could love someone as broken as you. We're quite a pair. We are. She pulled back to look at me, her brown eyes fierce with determination. But we're choosing each other. Consciously. Completely. That has to count for something. It counts for everything. We stood there in the gray Moscow morning holding each other, two broken people who'd found something like wholeness in the most impossible circumstances, and I knew with absolute certainty that I'd do anything to keep her, would kill to protect her, would die to save her, because she was mine, and I was hers, in ways that transcended ownership or property or any of the legal definitions that had brought us together. We were partners in darkness, survivors choosing each other, and that was enough.
The month after Sergei told me everything about his past was strange. Not bad, exactly, but weighted with new knowledge that colored every interaction. I'd look at him across the dinner table and see not just the oligarch who'd bought me, but the Siberian boy who'd clawed his way to power, the man who'd participated in horrors but also survived them, the man who'd given me truth when lies would have been easier. We settled into something that felt, against all odds, like an actual relationship. Not the captive captor dynamic we'd started with, but something more nuanced. I was still his in all the ways that mattered, wore his rings, gifts he called them, though we both knew they were markers of ownership, slept in his bed, submitted to his dominance both sexually and domestically. But now I understood the framework, understood the rules of the world we inhabited. Knowledge was power, even in captivity. "You're different since I told you," he observed one evening. We were in bed, that post-sex space where defenses were low and honesty came easier, more present somehow. I am present. Before, there was always this part of me holding back, wondering what you weren't telling me. Now I know, so I can give you all of me without reservations. No reservations at all? I turned to face him in the darkness, traced the line of his jaw with my finger. "I didn't say I liked everything about your past, but I understand it, and I've made peace with loving someone who's done terrible things. We've all done terrible things to survive. Mine are just different from yours. Your sins are circumstantial. Mine are chosen. You chose survival, same as me. We just had different paths to walk." He pulled me closer, and I went willingly, fitting myself against his body in the way that had become second nature. "I love you, Meredith Voronin." The name still caught me sometimes. Voronin, Slava's name, my husband's name, the name of a dead man I'd loved in another life. Sergei never asked me to change it, never suggested I should take his name instead, said it didn't matter what I was called as long as I stayed. "I love you too." But even as I said it, even as I meant it, there was a small voice in the back of my mind asking dangerous questions. Was this really love, or was it adaptation so complete I couldn't tell the difference? Was I genuinely happy, or had I just redefined happiness to fit the constraints of my captivity? I didn't have answers, wasn't sure I wanted answers. Sometimes ignorance was easier than truth. A few weeks later, on a Tuesday evening that seemed unremarkable in every way, Sergei came home from work with an expression I'd never seen before: serious, troubled. Maybe even scared, though that seemed impossible. Sergei was never scared. "We need to talk," he said, and my stomach clenched with automatic fear. We sat in the living room, the usual positions, him in his chair, me on the couch, but the space between us felt wider than usual, charged with something I couldn't name. "I've been thinking about us, about what kind of life we can have together given the constraints of my situation, given what I told you about the organization." "Okay," I said cautiously. "The 7-year lease, it's not indefinite. Eventually, assuming we both live that long, I'd have to make a choice about what happens to you. And marriage, while it extends the timeline, doesn't fundamentally change the power dynamic. You'd still be property, legally speaking, within the organization's eyes." "I know all this. Where are you going with it?" He leaned forward, elbows on knees, gray eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "I want to offer you something. Something I probably shouldn't offer. Something that puts us both at risk. But I can't keep you here, knowing what I know about you, without giving you a real choice. Sergey, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "I want to give you your freedom. Real freedom. I'll arrange travel documents, money, everything you need to return to the United States, to your family, your old life, or whatever new life you want to build. No strings attached, no conditions, just freedom." The words didn't make sense. I heard them individually, but couldn't assemble them into coherent meaning. Freedom? From Sergey? After everything? I don't understand. You said releasing me would put you at risk, that the organization would see it as breaking the rules. They would. But I've been thinking about Andre, about how he did the right thing, the moral thing, and paid for it with his life, and I've been asking myself if I'm brave enough to do the same. If loving you means anything, if I'm not willing to sacrifice for that love. You'd risk your life to let me go? I'd risk my life to give you the choice. Whether you go or stay, it has to be genuinely your choice, not Stockholm Syndrome, not adaptation to captivity, not submission born from lack of options, but real, conscious, free choice. I stood up, needing to move, needing to process this impossible offer. And if I choose to leave, if I go back to the States and tell people what happened to me, then I deal with the consequences. I have enough leverage with the organization that they probably won't kill me outright. But my life becomes significantly more complicated, more dangerous, more limited. You're gambling your safety on my silence. I'm gambling my safety on my belief that you love me, that what we've built is real enough that you wouldn't deliberately destroy me, even if you choose to leave. I could be wrong. Maybe the moment you're free, you'll want revenge, want to see me punished for everything I've done. That's the risk I'm taking. I turned to face him, saw the vulnerability in his expression. This man who controlled everything, who'd bought me like property, who'd built an empire on ruthlessness and calculation, he was offering me freedom at enormous cost to himself. Because he loved me, because he wanted my choice to be real. Why now? Why offer this now when we've been together for months, when things are good between us? Because if I don't offer it now, I never will. Because every day that passes without offering makes my claim of love more hollow. Because I need to know, need to be sure that you're here because you want to be, not because you have to be. And if I choose to stay, then we build a life together, a real life. Marriage, probably. Children, if you still want them. A partnership that's as equal as it can be given the circumstances. I'll still be dominant in our dynamic. That's who I am, who we are together. But you'll be choosing that dynamic freely, choosing me freely. The enormity of what he was offering hit me all at once. Freedom. The thing I dreamed about during those first weeks of captivity. The thing I'd thought I'd never have again. And now it was being offered on a silver platter by the man who'd taken it from me in the first place. But did I want it anymore? Did I want to go back to Oregon, to my tiny apartment and my boring job and my lonely life? Did I want to leave Sergey? Leave this strange, twisted, impossible love we'd built? I need time to think, I heard myself say. This is too big to decide right now. I know. Take all the time you need, but Meredith. He stood and crossed to me, took my hands in his. There is one condition, one requirement if you choose to leave. What? You have to actually live your old life again. For at least 3 months. You have to go back to the States, reconnect with your family and friends, remember who you were before Ukraine and Russia and me. You have to give your old life a real chance before you decide whether to come back. Why? Because I need to know your choice is informed. If you stay here, if you never leave this penthouse, you'll never know what you're choosing over. You'll always wonder if your old life might have been better. This way, if you come back, it's because you've weighed both options and genuinely prefer this one. It was smart, manipulative maybe, but also fair. Forcing me to confront what I'd lost, what I could potentially reclaim, making sure I couldn't later claim I'd never had a real choice. 3 months minimum, I said slowly. And if after 3 months I decide I want to stay in the States, you'll accept that? You won't come after me? Won't try to convince me otherwise? I'll accept it. I'll hate it. Will probably drink myself into oblivion for a few weeks, but I'll accept it. Your choice will be yours to make. I pulled my hands from his and stepped back, needing space to think. This was too much, too fast. Everything I'd adapted to over the past months was suddenly being called into question. Freedom was being offered when I'd stopped believing in it as a possibility. When would I leave? Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow, next week, next month, on your timeline. And the organization? How do you explain my absence? I tell them you died. An accident, tragic but believable. They'll want proof, but I can manufacture that. Give you a new identity, new documents. Make Meredith Veronin disappear from their records while Meredith Harris returns to the States as a former prisoner of war finally released. He'd thought of everything, planned for every contingency. This wasn't a spontaneous offer. This was carefully calculated, meticulously prepared. He'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months. working out how to give me freedom without destroying us both. I need to sit down, I said, suddenly dizzy with the implications. We sat together on the couch, close but not touching, the Moscow night pressed against the windows, and I thought about what lay beyond them: America, Oregon, my family, the life I'd left behind when I'd foolishly flown to Ukraine to marry a man I'd barely known. If I go, I said carefully, and I don't come back, if I choose the States, choose my old life, will you be okay? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Probably not, but I'll survive. I'm very good at surviving. I don't want to hurt you. I know, but sometimes love means being hurt, means taking risks that might not pay off. I'm willing to take this risk because the alternative, keeping you here, never knowing if you choose me freely, that's worse than the possibility of losing you. I leaned against him, let him put his arm around me, and we sat there in silence as the weight of his offer settled over us like snow. I love you, I said finally. Whether I go or stay, whether I come back or don't, I want you to know that I love you. This isn't manipulation or Stockholm syndrome or trauma bonding. Whatever else it might be, it's also love, real love. I know. I love you too. That's why I can let you go. We went to bed that night and made love with the desperation we hadn't felt since the early days, holding each other like we might disappear, might wake up and find this was all a dream. And afterward, lying in the darkness with his heartbeat steady beneath my ear, I tried to imagine leaving. Tried to imagine walking away from this man, this life, this twisted, impossible love story. Couldn't quite picture it, but I had to try, had to give my old life a chance, like he'd said, had to know for certain that this was where I belonged, even if the thought of leaving felt like tearing out my own heart. The plane touched down at Portland International Airport on a gray October afternoon. I'd been gone for nearly 8 months. 8 months that felt like 8 years, like 8 lifetimes. Everything looked the same through the terminal windows: the rain, the familiar Northwest landscape, even the way people moved with that particular Portland blend of casual and purposeful. But I wasn't the same. Not even close. Sergey had arranged everything with his usual efficiency. New documents identifying me as Meredith Harris, former dietitian, recently released from Russian captivity after months as a prisoner of war. A carefully constructed story about capture during the invasion of Ukraine, detention in various facilities, eventual release as part of a prisoner exchange the US government chose not to publicize. Stick to the story, he told me during our last night together in Moscow. Don't elaborate more than necessary. If pressed, say you can't talk about certain details due to ongoing diplomatic negotiations. People will understand. Will they believe it? They'll believe what they need to believe. People want simple narratives: war, capture, release. That's simple enough. We'd said goodbye at the penthouse. He'd offered to take me to the airport, but I'd declined. Easier to rip the bandage off quickly, to not draw out the pain. He'd held me for a long time in the doorway, his face buried in my hair, breathing me in like he was trying to memorize my scent. 3 months, he'd said, at least 3 months. Give your old life a real chance. And if I don't come back, then I'll know I loved you enough to let you be free. That has to be enough. I'd kissed him one last time, tasting salt from tears I couldn't identify as his or mine. Then I'd walked out of the penthouse that had been my prison and my home, gotten into the car he'd arranged, and started the long journey back to the life I'd left behind. Now, standing in the Portland airport with a single suitcase and a burner phone Sergey had given me just for emergencies, I felt completely unmoored. America smelled different, sounded different. Even the air felt different. Less heavy somehow, less laden with the weight of history and corruption and violence that permeated Moscow. My mother spotted me first. She'd been waiting at baggage claim despite my texts telling her I'd take a cab. She looked older than I remembered, grayer with new lines around her eyes and mouth. Lines I'd probably put there with my disappearance, my presumed death, my sudden resurrection. "Meredith," she breathed, and then she was running toward me, and I dropped my suitcase to catch her as she collided with me in a hug that nearly knocked us both over. She was crying. I was crying. People were staring, but I didn't care. My mother smelled like the lavender lotion she'd used my entire childhood, like home in a way Moscow had never smelled. And I held her and let myself cry for everything I'd lost, everything I'd survived, everything I still didn't know how to process. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed against my shoulder. "They told us you were dead. We had a memorial service. We buried an empty casket because there was no body to bring home. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I couldn't contact you, couldn't let you know. It doesn't matter. You're here now. You're alive. That's all that matters." But it did matter. All of it mattered. The lies and the secrets and the life I'd been living that she knew nothing about. The man in Moscow who I'd left behind but couldn't stop thinking about. The fact that I was here under false pretenses, testing whether I still fit into the life I'd abandoned. My father arrived a few minutes later, more reserved than my mother, but with tears in his eyes nonetheless. My brother Peter drove in from Seattle. Shirley showed up at my parents' house within an hour of hearing I was back, taking one look at me and pulling me into a hug that felt like absolution for all my stupid choices. "You're too thin," she said critically, holding me at arm's length to assess the damage. "And you have this look in your eyes like you've seen things that can't be unseen. But you're here. You're alive. That's what matters." Everyone kept saying that. "You're alive." Like survival was enough. Like being alive meant everything was fine now. But nothing was fine. I sat in my childhood bedroom that night. My parents had kept it exactly as I'd left it, like a shrine to the daughter they'd lost, and felt like a stranger in my own skin. The walls were covered with posters from college. The bookshelf held textbooks from my dietitian program. The desk still had papers from my last job at Creekside, from the life that seemed impossibly distant now. I pulled out the burner phone Sergey had given me. There were no contacts saved, no history, but I knew his number by heart. Had watched him program it into my memory before I left, making me repeat it back until I could recite it flawlessly. I typed out a text: "I'm here, safe." "It's strange being back." His response came within minutes: "I'm glad you're safe. Take your time. Really experience it. Don't rush the process. I miss you." A longer pause this time before his reply: "I miss you too, more than I thought possible. But this is right. This is what you need to do. I love you. I love you too. Now go sleep. Reconnect with your family. We'll talk soon." I set the phone aside and lay back on my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling I'd stared at for 18 years before leaving for college. Try to remember what it felt like to be the girl who'd slept here, who'd dreamed here, who'd thought her biggest problems were grades and boys and whether she'd get into her preferred dietetics program. That girl was gone, had been killed in Bucha along with Slava and his family. What remained was someone new, someone shaped by trauma and captivity and a twisted love affair that shouldn't exist but did. And I had no idea if that person could fit back into this old life. The first week back was overwhelming. Everyone wanted to see me, to hear my story, to welcome me home. My mother threw a small gathering despite my protests. Extended family, neighbors, people from my old job. They hugged me and told me how brave I was, how they'd prayed for me, how God had answered their prayers by bringing me home safe. I smiled and thanked them and felt like the worst kind of fraud. Because God hadn't brought me home, Sergei Petrushev had. A Russian oligarch who'd bought me at a human trafficking auction and then fallen in love with me, or I with him, or we with each other in some twisted mutual dependence that couldn't be explained to these well-meaning people drinking wine in my parents' living room. Shirley cornered me in the kitchen during the gathering. "Okay, what's really going on? And don't give me the prisoner of war story. I know you, Meredith. I can see something's not right. Everything's not right. How could it be? I watched my husband die. I was held captive for months. I'm traumatized, Shirley. That's what you're seeing. Maybe. But there's something else. Something you're not telling me. There's a lot I'm not telling you. A lot I can't tell you. Just give me time to adjust, okay? Let me figure out who I am now before you start pushing for details." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay. But when you're ready to talk, really talk, I'm here. No judgment, just listening." "I know. Thank you." But I'd never be able to really talk, never be able to explain what had happened to me, what I'd become, what I'd left behind in Moscow. Those secrets were mine to keep, Sergei's to keep, ours together. Sharing them would destroy too many things: his safety, my sanity, the fragile truth of what we were to each other. 2 weeks after returning, I was called to meet with U.S. authorities. They wanted to debrief me about my time in Russian captivity, wanted details for their files, wanted to understand exactly what had happened. My father came with me, protective and angry about how his daughter had been abandoned by her own government. The agent was professional, but clearly suspicious. Too many things about my story didn't quite add up. Why had the Russians claimed I'd died in a Ukrainian attack? Why had they suddenly released me now? What had happened during those months of captivity that I was so vague about? Ms. Harris, I understand this is difficult, but we need complete honesty. If something happened to you during your detention, assault, coercion, anything that might have compromised your loyalty, we need to know. I met his eyes steadily, channeling every ounce of trauma and grief and survival instinct into my performance. I was held in various facilities, interrogated about my husband and his family's potential connections to Ukrainian resistance, fed minimally, given basic necessities but nothing more. After months of determining I had no intelligence value, they released me as a gesture of goodwill during back-channel negotiations. That's all. You weren't mistreated, assaulted. I was held against my will. That's mistreatment enough. Beyond that, I was largely ignored. I'm nobody important, agent. Not worth whatever you're imagining happened. It wasn't entirely a lie. I was nobody important in the grand scheme of geopolitics. My captivity, my auction, my purchase, all of that existed in shadows. The US government either couldn't see or chose not to acknowledge. They let me go eventually, though I could tell they weren't satisfied. My father ranted the entire drive home about government incompetence, about how they'd failed me twice, first by not knowing I was alive, then by not believing my story of survival. I let him rant, easier than explaining the truth. By the end of the first month, I'd settled into a routine of sorts. Living with my parents, taking long walks through Portland's rainy streets, reconnecting with old friends for coffee dates where I gave sanitized versions of my ordeal. Everyone was kind. Everyone was supportive. Everyone treated me like a survivor who'd been through unimaginable trauma. And I was, but not the trauma they imagined. I texted Sergey regularly on the burner phone. Never anything too specific. We both knew phone security was questionable at best, but enough to maintain connection. He told me about his work, about Moscow, about the empty space in his penthouse where I used to be. I told him about Portland, about my family, about the strangeness of being back. Do you miss it? He texted one night. The life we had together? Every day. But I'm trying to give this a fair chance like you asked. Good. That's all I want. For you to really know what you're choosing. Have you been to any more auctions? A long pause before his response, no. Can't stomach the thought of it without you there to save. Realized how truly monstrous it all is when I can't rationalize it as rescuing you specifically. So I was special. You were always special, are always special. That's why I can let you go if you choose not to come back. By the second month, I started looking for jobs, partly to give myself purpose, partly to see if I could fit back into my old professional life. Creekside Post-Acute had filled my position, but other nursing homes were hiring. I updated my resume, went to a few interviews, and was offered a position at a facility similar to the one I'd left. I accepted, started work, and immediately knew it was wrong. The routine that had felt stifling before Ukraine now felt suffocating. Measuring medications, managing meal plans for elderly patients, dealing with family complaints and insurance paperwork, it all felt impossibly small after Moscow. After Sergei and his world of billions and power and danger, this was my old life. This was what I'd left behind. And I couldn't make myself care about any of it. You seem distracted, my supervisor commented after I'd been there 2 weeks. Is everything all right? I know you're readjusting after everything you went through. I'm fine, just still processing. I'll get better at focusing. But I wouldn't, because my mind was always in Moscow, always with Sergei, always comparing the safe, boring, predictable life with the intensity and darkness and twisted beauty of what I'd left behind. Shirley noticed too. We were having coffee one afternoon when she finally called me out directly. Okay, enough. What happened in Russia? And don't tell me it was just imprisonment. You have this look sometimes when you think nobody's watching, like you're somewhere else. Someone else. I stared into my latte, medium, extra foam, 1 pump of vanilla, the order Tyler still remembered from before I'd left, and tried to figure out how much truth I could share. There was someone, I said finally, in Russia, someone who helped me. Helped you how? Kept me safe, gave me shelter, food, protection, made sure I survived. A Russian who helped an American prisoner? That's unusual, very unusual. But it happened, and you fell for him. It wasn't a question, I fell for him. Or maybe I just adapted to captivity so completely that I confused dependence for love. I don't know anymore. But you're here, you left him, so he must have let you go. He did, gave me a choice. Come back to the States, try to reclaim my old life, see if this is really what I want. And if not, if I still want him after experiencing freedom again, then I can make that choice knowingly. Shirley was quiet for a long time, processing this partial truth. That's actually pretty noble for a Russian who had you in his custody. He's complicated. The situation is complicated. Everything about it is fucked up and wrong and impossible to explain. But I love him, and I miss him. And being back here, as much as I love seeing you and my family, it feels wrong, like I'm wearing someone else's life. So go back. It's not that simple. It never is. But life's too short to be where you don't want to be. You already learned that the hard way in Ukraine. Don't make yourself learn it again here. By month 3, I'd made my decision. Not consciously, not in some dramatic moment of clarity, but gradually, day by day, I'd realized that Portland wasn't home anymore. These people I loved weren't my people anymore. This life I'd fought so hard to return to wasn't my life. I was Sergei's. Had been since the moment he bought me, maybe. Certainly since the moment I'd chosen to go to his bedroom. And all the freedom in the world couldn't change that fundamental truth. I called him on the burner phone late one night after my parents had gone to bed. He answered on the second ring, sounding alert despite the time difference, meaning it was early morning in Moscow. Meredith. Is everything all right? I'm coming back. Silence. Then, carefully, it's only been 2.5 months. You said 3 months minimum. I don't need 3 months. I already know. This isn't where I belong anymore. Are you sure? Because once you come back, once you make this choice, I won't let you go again, not ever. You need to be certain. I'm certain. I love you. I miss you. I want the life we were building together. I want you. I heard him take a shaky breath. When? Soon. I need to tell my family something. Need to give them a version of the truth they can live with. What will you tell them? That I met someone in Russia, that I fell in love, that I'm going back to be with him. They won't understand, but they'll accept it eventually, especially if you're willing to talk to them, reassure them I'll be safe. I'll do whatever you need. I'll tell them whatever you want me to tell them, as long as it ends with you coming home. Home, I repeated, testing the word, and realized he was right. Moscow was home now. His penthouse was home. He was home. Everything else was just places I used to know. I'll make arrangements, travel, documents, everything. You just tell your family. 2 days, right? 2 days. And Sergey, yes, I love you. Not because I have to, not because I'm adapted to captivity or traumatized or confused, but because I've tried the alternative and I choose you. Freely, consciously, completely. His voice was rough when he responded. I love you too. Hurry home, Meredith. I've been lost without you. Me too. The conversation with my parents was harder than I'd expected. My mother cried. My father raged. Peter asked if I was insane. Shirley just looked sad and resigned, like she'd seen this coming. I met someone in Russia, I told them, sticking to the version of truth I'd prepared. Someone who helped me survive. Someone I fell in love with. I'm going back to be with him. You're going back to Russia? To Putin's Russia? After everything that happened to you there? My father's voice was incredulous, angry, protective. Not all of Russia was evil. Not everyone there wanted to hurt me. He protected me, kept me safe, and I love him. Who is he? What's his name? What does he do? My mother's questions came rapid fire, desperate for information that might help her understand. His name is Sergey. He's successful, wealthy, well-connected. He'll keep me safe, I promise. Can we meet him? Talk to him? How do we know you'll really be safe? So I arranged a video call. Sergey appeared on my laptop screen looking polished and professional, speaking perfect English with his slight accent, reassuring my parents that he loved their daughter. that she'd be protected, that she could visit them or they could visit Moscow, that this wasn't goodbye forever. My father asked hard questions. Sergei answered them patiently. My mother asked about my safety. Sergei guaranteed it. By the end of the call, they were still unhappy, still worried, but resigned to the fact that I was an adult making my own choices. "You sure about this?" my mother asked after we'd hung up. "You're really sure?" "I'm sure. I know it seems crazy. After Slava, after Ukraine, after everything, why would I go back to Russia? But I need to do this, Mom. I need to be with him. Then we'll support you. We don't have to like it, but we'll support you. Thank you. That means everything." 2 days later, I hugged my parents goodbye at the airport. My mother cried again. My father held me tight and whispered, "If you ever need to come home, if he ever hurts you, or if it becomes unsafe, you call us immediately." Promise me. I promise. But I knew I wouldn't need to make that call. Knew I was making the right choice, the only choice that made sense for who I'd become. The plane lifted off from Portland, carrying me away from America, from my old life, from everything familiar and safe, carrying me back to Moscow, to Sergei, to the dark and twisted and beautiful life we built together. I didn't look back. Epilogue. Sergei was waiting for me at the penthouse. I'd told him not to meet me at the airport, wanting to arrive on my own terms, to walk back into this life consciously and deliberately. The doorman recognized me, smiled, and welcomed me back like I'd never left. The elevator carried me up to the top floor, to the home I'd chosen freely this time. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside, and everything was exactly as I'd left it. The same minimal furniture, the same art on the walls, the same view of Moscow spread out below. But it felt different now, felt like coming home rather than entering a prison. Sergei stood by the windows, backlit by the city lights, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Relief? Joy? Fear that I might still change my mind? I dropped my suitcase and crossed the room to him. No words, just movement, closing the distance between us. And then I was in his arms and he was holding me like he'd never let go. "You came back?" he murmured against my hair. "I came back. I chose you. I choose this." He pulled back to look at me, gray eyes searching mine. "Does any part of you regret this? About us?" "Never. The horror and trauma and impossible circumstances, I'll probably have regrets about that forever. But about choosing to be with you, no regrets at all." He kissed me then, and it was everything I'd been missing for 3 months. His taste, his touch, his presence. Coming home in the most fundamental sense. When we finally broke apart, he cupped my face in his hands. "We'll get married, properly, in Italy or France or wherever you want. Give your family a ceremony they can attend, a wedding they can celebrate, make it as real and legitimate as we can within the constraints of our situation. And then? And then we build the life we talked about. Children, eventually, if you still want them. A real partnership, as equal as it can be given our dynamics. A future together. "As your partner and your property," I said, echoing words from before. "As my wife and my love and my equal, who happens to also be submissive in our private life, because that's what works for us. Both things can be true, Meredith. You can be powerful and subordinate simultaneously. It's not a contradiction." Maybe he was right. Maybe I could be both. Maybe that's what I'd been learning these past months, how to be strong in my submission, powerful in my choice to yield. We made love that night with the intensity of 3 months apart, of choices made and futures claimed. Afterward, lying in his bed in his penthouse in the city that had become home, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. Meredith Harris, the dietitian from Oregon, Meredith Veronin, the widow from Buka. And now this Meredith, nameless in some ways, claimed in others, belonging to Sergei Petrushev by purchase and choice and love. It was wrong. It would always be wrong in so many ways, built on trafficking and trauma, maintained through submission and secrets, but it was also real, also love, also home. "I love you," I whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," he replied. "Thank you for coming back, for choosing this, for choosing me. Where else would I go? You're my home now, and you're mine. Always mine, always yours." Outside, Moscow glittered like fallen stars. Inside, we held each other and planned impossible futures and chose, consciously and freely, to build a life on foundations that should never have held but somehow did. Because love, even dark love, twisted love, impossible love, was still love. And sometimes that had to be enough.
If you made it all the way to the end, thank you. Your support truly means everything to us. As many of you know, YouTube no longer allows monetization of audiobooks. That makes it harder for us to continue producing the dark, intense romance stories you love. So if you'd like to help us keep going, the best way to support the channel is by joining our Patreon. The link is in the description. We'll be posting even more content on Patreon, including exclusive dark romance stories you won't find here. And that's not all. We'll also be re-releasing previous audiobooks with improved narrators, something many of our YouTube subscribers have asked us to level up. We've heard you, and we're committed to making the listening experience even better. If you're craving darker stories, higher stakes, and upgraded narration, Patreon is where it's all happening. Check out the link in the description and join us there. Your support helps us continue creating and takes these stories to the next level. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.